Wavesound Audio presents an unabridged recording of James Cook, The Story of the Man Who Mapped the World, by Peter Fitzsimons, narrated by Michael Carman.
The dedication reads, "To the late John Court Beaglehole, OM, CMG, of New Zealand, the historian to whom all who attempt to tell the story of James Cook will be most indebted. And to my late friend Professor John Maloney of Australia, who, not long before he died at the age of 91, encouraged me down the path of writing this book, and gave me wise counsel as to how to do it." Introduction. In its first conception, the plan for this book was relatively simple, and it came from my wife, Lisa Wilkinson. Captain Cook, she noted to me in mid-2017, is the most mythological figure in Australian history, the one most constantly raised through the ages, and yet none of us really have a feel for the man himself. Who was he? What was he like? You should do a book and try to find out. Yes, dear. But I really took her point, particularly with the focus on Cook growing as the 250th anniversary of his landing at Botany Bay approaches. He really is the most iconic figure in these parts since his arrival, with perhaps only Ned Kelly to argue the toss. And I had previously noted the ubiquity of Captain Cook in my own first studies of Australian history while at Peats Ridge Public School in the latter part of the 1960s. That man was everywhere, in every account, from the so-called beginning of Australian history. I know, but we'll get to that. I wrote in my childhood memoirs, A Simpler Time, "In fact, in all of the history lessons, I don't recall anyone else at all, bar the good captain, being present in the saga. It was almost as if after sailing the Endeavour across the 7 seas, one morning Captain Cook in the Crow's Nest shouted, 'Land ho!' to Captain Cook on the bridge, who had in turn shouted to a dozen Captain Cooks on the deck to heave ho, me hearties, haul on the ropes, trim the mainsails, and nor by northwest, let's bring her round into Botany Bay, singing Tooralai Ooralai Atterley, singing Tooralai Ooralai A," or something like that. Or something like that indeed. But who was he? What formed him, ignited his passion? What made him laugh, cry, sing? Who was the man behind the monument? Of course, he was all the rage when imperialism and colonialism were regarded as a very good thing, only for his popularity to plummet when the empire struck back and Cook came to be regarded as one of the prime instruments of imperial invasion. But who really was the actual person behind the misunderstood, misremembered, and mythologized man so many have come to know, love, and in recent times sniff unpleasantly at? One way or another, though, I wanted to get to the bottom of how the humble James Cook, who must have come from somewhere, I guess, became the iconic Captain Cook I'd heard so much about. How that first remarkable voyage encompassing Tahiti, New Zealand, and Australia transformed him from a man into a legend, and to see if I could breathe life into that man again in these pages. Clearly it was not going to be easy to find the man himself. Nearing the end of his life, the master writer and historian John Court Beaglehole, OM, CMG, confessed to the difficulty of getting to the core of this blurry legend. "Searching around as I do for the man," he noted with an air of resignation in 1969, "some leading characteristic, some not very secret spring, I light on stubbornness." I concur. It just wasn't stubbornness of the expressive variety. My reckoning is that, even as a child, if James Cook had badly stubbed his toe, he would have been unlikely to cry out. And even as a sea captain, and then legendary English figure, so buttoned down was his nature that precious few utterances of any real interest made it into the diaries and letters of his contemporaries, at least not from the first of his 3 major voyages, which is the one that interested me. Even James Boswell, the great British diarist and chronicler of his times, a dragnet for people and quotes of interest in the latter part of the 1700s, noted that he simply found Cook a plain, sensible man with an uncommon attention to veracity. I talked a great deal with him today, as he was very obliging and communicative. He seemed to have no desire to make people stare, and being a man of good steady moral principles, as I thought, did not try to make theories out of what he had seen to confound virtue and vice. Cook not only understated things, he barely stated anything at all. The world would prove to be his oyster, but he left behind barely any quotable pearls of wisdom. The brilliant writer Fanny Burney also met Cook, and was equally underwhelmed at his conversation, albeit with a rider. Here she is at a dinner party with Cook after the return of the Endeavour from southern climes. This truly great man appeared to be full of sense and thought, well-mannered and perfectly unpretending, but studiously wrapped up in his own purposes and pursuits, and apparently under a pressure of mental fatigue when called upon to speak, or stimulated to deliberate on any other. And yet, when Burney is confronted by his stilted ineptitude, after she asks James Cook to compare his journey with others he has embarked upon, the not-so-ancient mariner suddenly comes good, by nimbly showing her in a fashion that thrills. Captain Cook instantly took a pencil from his pocketbook and said he would trace the route, which he did in so clear and scientific a manner that I would not take £50 for the book. The pencil marks, having been fixed by skin milk, will always be visible. That is Cook, a man of few words and many extraordinary actions. Joseph Banks, by contrast, burst from every page he wrote, every diary entry written by his contemporaries, everything he did. In my book Mutiny on the Bounty, which briefly covered the Endeavour voyage insofar as it concerned their arrival at Tahiti, I had already been stunned by Joseph Banks' sexual proclivities when he had first visited that fair island, from a man who used to be on our $5 note, damn it. And now, here he was again, cutting a swathe through the whole Cook story on their first voyage to the Pacific. It became ever more clear that Captain Cook and Mr. Banks were a peculiar pair, a daring duo, totally different in background, temperament, personality and character. And yet they formed a brilliant if uneasy partnership that achieved extraordinary things. Their relationship, in particular, came to fascinate me in the course of researching this book, and I hope what follows will bring out much of its particularities. In terms of that research, my starting point, like every Cook biographer, was the life's work of the aforementioned great historian J.C. Beaglehole, a man so serious about getting to the heart of his subject that he was not content merely to read the published account of Cook's journals. Oh no, as he later recounted, to get to the bottom of James Cook, one could not be content merely to read between the printed lines, but must go to the originals, and study the deletions and alterations, the drafts and second thoughts, the doubts and surmises, as well as the decisions, the blots, as well as the fair copies. This bloke was as thorough as any writer who ever lived, and I must make clear I am not so presumptuous as to claim to have found an answer that differs from Beaglehole's, though I certainly differ from him in emphasis and never more than in the scene of Cook's landing at Botany Bay. He is the master, and everyone who follows Beaglehole into the realms of Captain Cook must do precisely that. But what I at least hope I have added to the plethora of works on Cook is an attempt, if not to get inside his head, at least to get as far as possible inside his life and times, that as much as possible the reader can be in the moment, not merely observing it from afar. And given that every oft-told story will be told differently according to the age in which it is told, as we see things through the lens of our own times, I record the three angles of Captain Cook that interest me most. Cook's time in Australia and New Zealand, his role in asserting British sovereignty over lands with peoples that had been there for thousands of years, in Australia's case 65,000 years, and his interaction with the indigenous peoples of those lands. In Australia, late in this second decade of the new millennium, The issues of sovereignty and British dealings with the First Peoples are particularly important as we try to come to terms with our history and turn the page to a new and more equitable chapter. Where does Captain Cook fit into all of that? Exactly. Not long ago, the Australian government dismissed the latest attempt by Indigenous Australians to present their own vision for the future in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Professor Bruce Buchan of Griffith University recently wrote. Cook is not the appropriate avatar of empire to embody this continued denial, but his persistent enrolment as national icon ensures that his legacy will continue to shadow the nation's future. Would it be too much to ask that instead of avatar or icon, hero or villain, we begin to see Captain Cook with fresh eyes? We might then begin to see beyond him, beyond the reflection of our wished-for selves, and begin to perceive new possibilities. Give me some room, please, Professor. I'm going to give it a shot. Prologue. I want to go to sea, sir. James Cook to his master at age 17. At the entrance of a little nameless river, scarce indeed worth a name, stands Whitby, which, however, is an excellent harbour, and where they build very good ships for the coal trade, and many of them too, which makes the town rich. Daniel Defoe, 1724, on the port which launched the maritime career of James Cook. 1746. Staithes, England. From threads to ropes. James Cook is a scurrilous thief. Can it be? The worst kind of abomination. A lad whose honest, hard-working and easy-going appearance is nothing but a facade for evil skullduggery, which has seen him take advantage of those who trust him most. And yes, it pains Mr. William Sanderson, the gentle shopkeeper in the village of Staithes, clinging precariously to the shore of the North Sea at the base of the highest cliffs in England, to come to such a conclusion. But there is no way around either his conviction or his extreme disappointment. Why, he couldn't have been more kind to this farming lad, who he had treated as if his own son. Yes, he had taken young Cook into his drapery-cum-grocery store 18 months ago at the age of 16, fed him well and paid him a basic wage to sweep out and prepare the shop each morning, and attend to customers during the day. In the evenings, after the day's trade is done, the till is tallied with no dilly-dally, and the last of the items on the countertops are safely sealed and stored. The floor is swept, and the door locked. Mr. Sanderson climbs the stairs to his family dwelling above the shop, leaving James to take his supper alone at the counter. Young James pauses only to glory in that deliciously tangy waft that rises off the fried fish before he wolfs it down, followed by a rough knob of bread, and the whole lot washed down by a small mug of ale, a frothy brown warm brew with a woody flavour that is like mother's milk to a baby. After supper, the lad often roams the shoreline, breathing deep on the intoxicating sea air, gazing at the bobbing vessels and visiting the taverns, the Shoulder of Mutton, the Black Lion, and, most particularly, the place just a few doors down the cobbled street from Mr. Sanderson's shop, the Cod and Lobster. It is in this smoky tavern, one of a row of ramshackle establishments lining the seashore, while the craggy cliffs of Yorkshire crowd in from behind, that young James can talk long and late to the heavily weathered fishermen, known as cobblemen after their flat-bottomed boats called cobbles, who are downing their ales and puffing on their pipes, even as they tell tales of whales, of larks with sharks, and fierce North Sea gales, which generate waves so big they were higher than the sails, I tell you, young James. The stories they tell of travelling the world, the lure of the sea, the sense of being afloat on infinity, with the possibility of going anywhere. Yes, and as they talk of distant ports, of New York, New France, the Cape of Good Hope, Batavia, and the mysterious South Seas, that largely unknown watery expanse ruled jealously, if not quite zealously, by the Spaniards since the days of Balboa, young James soaks it up like a sponge, remembering details, conjuring distant worlds with all that he can muster of what, in another more expressive lad, might pass for delight. It is the same when some of the men talk of their adventures serving in His Majesty's Navy, close cannon battles with French ships with masts falling, men dying, and His Majesty's Jack still flying, narrow escapes from the mighty Spanish fleet, the horrors of salt pork rations for weeks on end, and, wait while I remove my shirt, see here, young James, the gnarled scars that tell of the time I was flogged before the mast for speaking back to the captain. I never did that again, I can tell you. James Cook is not put off. He wants to experience such things himself, all bar the brutal flogging. The stories are a siren's song with every telling, the call ever stronger, shaping his dreams and guiding his days to the point that he positively needs to leave this lubber's life on land and sail off into a perpetually bobbing and oft dangerous world. If you learn enough, you can tame it, master it, survive, just as these men have survived, to tell their tales. James Cook sits enthralled, night after night, hungry for more, and is often still there at midnight, at which point the men must leave to take their boats out fishing, and he must plod back to the store. And the fishermen, like the lad so well in turn, noting his affability of conversation and his eagerness to learn everything he could about their lives at sea, that they encourage him, occasionally letting him come along on their cobbles, venturing a little way out to sea in the inky night. Yes, perhaps Sanderson has given James Cook too much rope. The earnest, if slightly dreamy lad has practically been one of the family, albeit one who returns each night to sleep on a straw mattress under the shop counter, where there are fewer cockchafers, beetles, and earwigs than in the rest of the shop. But so industrious had the gangly young cook seemed, so good-natured, so attentive in his work, weighing herbs and flour with precision, measuring lengths of cloth and ribbon, then measuring them again, before cutting them straight as an arrow with an unwavering hand, counting out buttons one by one, that Mr. Sanderson could already see the day when the young fellow might become a partner in the business and allow his master and mentor to live an easier life, filled with more prayer and rest. But now, suddenly, such hopes are shattered. For just today young James has stolen from him, robbed the cash box of a shilling. That James Cook is a scurrilous thief. Again and again, his brow furrowed, his heart breaking, Mr. Sanderson goes over the events which prove it. In the morning, a well-heeled lady had come in to purchase her groceries, and paid with a shiny shilling, the lustre of which had nearly matched her own. Mr. Sanderson had put it in the cash box, and, now that trade is done, and he is toting up the day's takings, it is gone. Of course it has to be young James, as he is the only other person with access to the cash box. How disappointed the lord of the manor of Acton in Yorkshire, Thomas Scottow, will be to hear the news, for it had been Malud himself who had noted the promise and nimble mind of this young fellow, the son of one of his labourers, and after paying for his schooling, had arranged for his apprenticeship with Mr. Sanderson. And now all of that is destroyed over a stolen shilling. Mr. Sanderson, taking his cane in hand, he uses it as infrequently as he does reluctantly, but this would appear to be such an occasion, walks into the drapery looking for the lad, only to find him missing. And so Sanderson, by now an angry squall with darkened brow, ready to boom thunder and crack lightning, sticks his head out into the street, a waft of sea air filling his nose. "Men," he calls to a couple of fishermen leaning against a post across the street, "have you seen James Cook? He's run away and robbed me of a shilling." But the fishermen won't have it. They're fond of this broth of a boy, and will never believe for a moment that he is capable of such a thing.
Robbed you? Thou robbed it this'n last night to pay to reckoning. Are thou too drunk yet to mind going out for the money?
It is frankly a fair point. If not the drinking part, at least the sheer unlikeliness that young James had robbed him. Shaking his head, Sanderson walks back to the box to check once again. Surely it must be there. Alas, alas, still no shiny shilling. But in fact James hasn't run away at all, for here he is now, returning from an errand, for all the world as if he has done nothing at all. James, come in here, please. The old man looks the young fellow up and down, and asks the question he must. Did you steal the shilling? The answer from the shaken lad, for you must believe me, Mr. Sanderson, as my whole future life depends on it, is yes, and no. The thing is, Mr. Sanderson, I did take the shiny shilling, but I replaced it with another shilling. What? And why? Outside, the horses clip-clop by on the cobblestones, pulling wagons filled with herring, cod, and other fish freshly hauled off the water-worn fishing boats drawn up at the harbour's edge. Underneath their fishy cargo are carefully secreted duty-free bottles of wine, brandy, and perfumes, smuggled in by the fishermen to satisfy the locals' growing appetite for such luxuries at a price they can afford. But on this day, the shopkeeper has ears only for young James, as, in his strong Yorkshire accent, a curious combination of the labourer's argot he had grown up with, all sharp vowels and dropped consonants, their words cut short and strung together wherever possible, and the more sophisticated words he has picked up from his ceaseless reading after hours, the lad makes his case.
Whilst I took yon shilling, I nae took it for all. I am nowt thief. It were replaced, straight, with mine own shilling, sir.
For you see, sir, while I did take the shiny shilling, I instantly replaced it with one of my own. I'm not a thief. But why, James? Why replace one shilling with another? James Cook takes the shiny shilling from his pocket, enjoying its lustre, its delicious weight, and shows one side of it to Mr. Sanderson. For as you can see, sir, the remarkable thing about this shilling is not just its shine, it is where it comes from. While on the obverse there is the standard depiction of His Majesty King George I, and the reverse has the unremarkable British arms in 4 crowned shields, please look there, Mr. Sanderson. Look closely, and you will see the letters SSC. This, sir, is a South Sea shilling, minted from silver found in the East Indies by the South Sea Company back in the 1720s, and that is why I took it. Clip, clop, clip, clop, clip, clop. A pungent, fishy cloud hovers in the wagon's wake and drifts through the open front door of Mr. Sanderson's shop. Still, Mr. Sanderson is none the wiser. So what if it is from the South Seas? What is that to you, young James?
I want to go to sea, sir,
James says, simply. For a year and a half he has been a dutiful apprentice shopkeeper and done his best. He's halfway done. For many a lad whose father is a mere day labourer turned farm bailiff on a farm outside the coastal industrial town of Whitby, nearly as poor as the dirt he tills, just the idea that he will likely run a store of his own would be enough of a step up in life. But one cannot spend hours, days, weeks, months, and now years in a dull store by the seaside, watching ships come and go, and not wonder about where they have come from, where they are going to, and not hunger to experience some of that himself. He wants to go to sea, sir. Infinitely relieved, at least, that the fine young man really is a fine young man after all, and has not let him down terribly, Mr. Sanderson goes from disappointment to deliverance. He loosens his grip on his cane, and on the spot he grants James a release from his indenture. Over the coming days, the kindly shopkeeper even uses his good offices to secure young James an apprenticeship with his friend John Walker, a local shipowner and fellow Quaker, who, in partnership with his brother Henry, runs colliers out of Whitby, ferrying coal from Newcastle just to the north, down the east coast of England and up the Thames to feed the rapidly multiplying factories of a booming industrial London, which burns over 1 million tons a year. For young Cook, taking 10 such round trips a year down the coast and back is a perfect opportunity to learn the ropes. Yes, it means that the 18 months of hard work as a shop apprentice are effectively thrown away. But as it happens, his time in Staithes had been extremely valuable in any case. The colourful, rough breed of men, who are the local fishermen, had taught the young fellow to dream. It had all become so intoxicating that, even back in the shop lately, on the busiest of days, he could think of little else. Well, now it is time to try to turn his dreams into reality. And so, one day in late autumn, when the leaves are just starting to fall and there is the beginning of a bite in the air, it happens. The scraggly, long-limbed James Cook, newly turned 18 years old, puts all of his worldly belongings into one sack, throws it over his shoulder, and sets off. On the cliff tops above Staithes, he takes one last look behind to the tiny town far below, and buttoning his coat against the now strong wind, begins walking southward 12 miles cross-country, over the moors. Not for nothing does a local saying have it that the only road to Whitby is the sea, until he reaches the western cliff above the destination of his dreams. And there it is. Just below is the bustling medieval port town of Whitby, a vista of tightly packed red-tiled roofs cluttered together on steep slopes. Young Cook skips down the rough-hewn stone steps that wind between the houses all the way to the port proper, built around the River Esk, which flows into the North Sea at this point. Around the narrow river mouth, a veritable harbour when the tide is high, and a shallow inlet laced with intertidal mudflats when it's low, bustling shipyards jostle against each other for position along the river's silty banks, astir with maritime industry. Ship skeletons sit half-built on dry docks, sooty smoke billows from fires at the rope-works. Taking it all in, glorying in being a part of this busy seaside port, limber young James now wanders along the cobbled paths to the port proper, through the mass of captains, sailors, workers, and street urchins, and begins to make inquiries.
"Hello, my name is James Cook, and I'm looking for the house of John Walker, if you could help me."
Yes, as a matter of fact, they can. Captain Walker is well known in this tight-knit community, and young James is soon making his way to the house, delighting in all the booming industry going on around him, the smell of fish, tar, hemp, and freshly sawn timber, all mingling in the smoky air. He has arrived. Captain Walker's 3-story higgledy-piggledy house is just 20 feet from the water's edge, at the end of Grape Lane, formerly Grope Lane, and before that Grope Cunt Lane, when it was infamous for prostitution, a thoroughfare so narrow that one of the many drunk men lying across it over the centuries could have his boots touching one side of it and his hands the other. Just as many a life has suddenly and radically altered course on the flip of a coin, so too has young James gone from one life to another in a very short time. All because his own shiny shilling has come up with neither heads nor tails, but sails, the call of the South Seas. Like all the ship owners of this port, John Walker and his brother Henry, who proved to be friendly men, at least so far as oft-cantankerous ship owners go, run small colliers of the type known as Whitby Cats, a lightly rigged vessel of around 105 feet in length with a remarkably shallow draught. They are round in the bow, broad and square in the stern. Her lines are laid for room rather than speed. Her length is about 3 times her breadth. With a crew of just a dozen or less, a Whitby cat, the cat part is thought to have come from the Norwegian katti, meaning ship, can carry 30 keels of coal in its hold, some 600 tons, and, most importantly, do so with remarkable safety, as its shallow draught and wide waist allow it to ride out nearly any storm and sail with impunity over all but the most shallow of shoals, those troublesome sandbanks often found just below the water's surface. The key is to touch and go, touched so lightly in shallow waters that you can still keep going, effectively nudging your way forward. Not for the cat any ornamental figure on the prow, though, for it is built for work, not beauty. Like a short, fat lad with a snub nose and feet set wide apart, the Whitby cat cannot move particularly fast, but it can carry a very heavy load, and can be exceedingly difficult to knock over. If it were of equine nature, it would be all pit pony and no show pony, with the heart of a thoroughbred. Of course, the great day soon arrives when young James sets foot on the deck of a Whitby cat for the first time, and it is like a lad from a thatched cottage, rather like that of his parents, first setting foot in a cathedral, gazing at the towering masts high above, the shimmering furled sails like the wings of a giant bird. James Cook, who was also put together with no frills and an enormous capacity for work, is soon springing up into a very tall and striking lad indeed, over 6 feet tall, with a strong nose and earnest gaze. And to the delight of Mr. Walker, he proves extraordinarily adept at grasping even complex concepts. At the local school for apprentices, over his first wintry Whitby months, he plunges confidently straight into learning the basic principles of navigation, the meaning of latitude and longitude, how to read a chart, and much more. Whitby's apprentice schools are nothing like the grammar schools or public schools of larger towns across Great Britain. You don't need Greek, Latin, or literature to run a ship, so why learn it? In these parts, they teach practical skills for budding jack-tars, sailors, to give them the tools to turn themselves into fine seamen. For his part, the practical James could not be happier. As a child, he had benefited from the kindly attentions of his wealthy master's kindly wife, Mrs. Scotto, who had recognised his sharpness and taken time to teach him his letters, giving him a key which he had delighted thereafter in turning in every lock he could find. Yes, though a mere labourer's child in the tiny village of Marton, what had set him apart had been his thirst for knowledge, and immediately thereafter the 4 happy years spent at the village school in Great Ayton, surrounded by other children, improving his reading, learning how to write, and the first rules of arithmetic, had been a pleasure. And he now realises how much he had missed those days of learning while in the shop with Mr. Sanderson. Now, back at it, in a classroom among many other lads just like himself, there are no fewer than 1,256 apprentices listed in Whitby this year, and learning all about subjects that will directly help him to live his sea-going dream, young James learns as never before, growing intellectually with every week that passes, to the delight of his teachers. So, too, is his home life happy, as he is truly welcomed into Mr. Walker's household, where, at the insistence of dear Mrs. Walker, he eats with the family, and, at the meal's conclusion, is not obliged to retreat to sleep under a shop counter, but may retire gracefully to the perfectly comfortable attic in their plain Quaker-like house. The Walkers' house, like the Walkers themselves, exudes a solid old-world integrity, built from hard work, for stability, and with no facade whatsoever. Their home is a fitting sanctuary in which a young man like James Cook might learn the value of patience and humility. Sharing these lodgings are other apprentices, their bunks closely grouped just like the hammocks on a real ship. But here he does not sleep. No, he has retired to do more study, For the Walkers' housekeeper, Mary Proud, his trusty old nurse, who has taken such a shine to the lad she calls him Honey James, always ensures that his chair is in position before a table bearing many freshly sharpened pencils on the right-hand side, illuminated by many candle ends for him to burn so that he can pore over his books and tables into the night, usually making endless calculations, designed to hone his capacity for working out where in the world, literally, he might be. It's all a luxury he's never known before, with time to devote himself exclusively to learning, with a base that fully facilitates the same. Not only does James feel at home, he is at home, with his buttoned-down personality fitting in well with the Quaker values of modesty, hard work, diligence, and a markedly gentle way of dealing with the world. In fact, the entire port of Whitby, with a strong Quaker community forming the backbone of its 5,000 residents, is an equally fertile environment for a young man like him who is eager to work hard, improve himself, and gain a maritime education above all other things. For Whitby judges a man on devotion to those values far more than the mere class concerns that prevail in much of the rest of England. And just as a Quaker cares not for class and is not intimidated by aristocracy, nor does he drink too much, nor does he visit brothels or engage in brawling. He is moderate in all things, bar hard work. Still, as John Walker knows only too well, as he has been disappointed by bright sparks before, excelling at book learning is one thing. Prospering at sea is another thing entirely. Ah, but young James Cook proves adept at that too, for from the moment he plants his feet on the deck of his first vessel, the Freelove, in February 1747, it is as though the rocking of his cradle must have been the precursor to the rocking of this ship, for it is like he was born to go to sea. Young Cook is, in a word, indefatigable. Mr. Walker, like so many people after him, finds young James a fellow of surprising and extraordinary gifts, capable of relentless focus over long periods, and a singular capacity to get the job done, come what may. A fellow of action who is hungry to learn practical seamanship, all the parts of a ship and her rigging, the sails, the running, and the standing gear, and how to use them. These are the foundations to turn a lad from landlubber to sailor. Now see here. This here raised deck, just behind the mainmast, is the quarter-deck, and this is where the captain commands the vessel from, as it allows full vision of all the ship's workings without turning your head. Just behind him is the tiny poop-deck, which can also be used for observation, but is essentially the roof of the captain's cabin, the most comfortable spot on the ship. In terms of sleeping quarters, you can judge your importance by how close to that cabin you are, aft the mast, with all the officers' quarters high and towards the stern of the ship, away from the part that must bash through the waves. The common seamen, however, are before the mast. The further forward and lower down you are, the lower you are in the hierarchy. And while here at sea we don't talk about miles, we talk of furlongs and leagues. With nearly 8 furlongs to a mile and 28 furlongs to a league, so a league is a wee bit under 3.5 miles, do you see? And a cable is some 185 yards. As to 25 miles in total of rope, you see, that makes up the spider web of lines and rigging about all the masts, that will take a little more explaining. While at sea, Cook watches the old salts working in the rigging. He memorises the coastline between Whitby and London, and he learns to navigate around the treacherous shoals and hidden rocks of England's east coast and the notorious Thames estuary. By the time he instinctively thinks in terms of larboard and starboard instead of left and right, he is granted his dearest wish of all, and sent to more distant and dangerous horizons, on voyages even beyond the North Sea coal trade. He even gets an exhilarating taste of the oft-treacherous Baltic Sea, when he takes coal to the Low Countries and returns with timber, pitch, hemp and iron to supply Whitby's shipbuilding industry. He even joins voyages in the government's service, ferrying foreign mercenaries and their horses from Middelburg in Flanders to Dublin and Liverpool, allowing him to sail the Channel and the Irish Sea, to weather storms with towering waves, find his sea legs, and grow in confidence with every passing day. Most impressively, once on shore, the lad shows no interest in downing copious amounts of liquor at the taverns, and no interest in whorehouses, unlike so many of the other young sailors. Instead, with Walker's strong encouragement, he concentrates on his studies. As the Walker brothers beam just to see the lad blossoming in this fashion, young James evolves into a young man who is never idle, but always at work on something, just like his masters. Occasionally he can make it back home to his own family at Great Ayton, where, as the second of 8 children, he is greeted as the conquering hero, with his beloved mother Grace always preparing a special meal for the occasion. But even while he is with them, the truth is he is always hungering to get back to Whitby and get to sea. Certainly it takes 3 years of seafaring for James Cook to finish his apprenticeship and be promoted from boy to able seaman in the Merchant Navy. But by the time he gets there in 1750, he is a highly qualified able seaman. For he is not only capable of rigging, operating and maintaining the sails, scrubbing the decks, caulking leaky seams in the wooden hull by using a mallet and caulking iron to force the sticky black pitch into the gaps just so, but he can also speak fluent sailor. "Abaft the beam! Catch a turn there! Haul there, me hearty! Pretty the main deck! Ready with the lead!" And also has the hang of accurate depth sounding, not to mention knowing how to read the barometer to predict the weather. Depth sounding, at least, or swinging the lead, as it is more commonly known, is fairly easy. In fact, one of the easiest jobs on the ship as you stand on the special platform built outside the hull by the bows of the ship and swing a long, thin piece of rope on which is attached a heavy piece of lead into the water. The rope has regularly spaced pieces of material wrapped around it, made of leather, calico, serge, and different pieces of rope, and by seeing how many knots, 1 fathom, 6 feet, per knot, disappear beneath the waves before you hit the bottom, you can easily determine the depth of water you're in, and, most crucially, whether the ship is in danger by being in water that is too shallow. Reading the barometer, too, is fairly straightforward. I'll say it one more time, James. When the glass falls low, prepare for a blow. When it rises high, let your kites fly. And again, and again. Winds at night are always bright, but winds in the morning sailors take warning. Bit by bit, the young fellow builds up a deep well of experience by being in a difficult sea off a wind-swept coast of uncertain contours. Week after week, month after month, Cook is in the prow of the bow as the Whitby Cat nudges through the storm-ravaged North and Baltic seas, regularly darting into shore to load and unload coal, through thick mists and waters littered with shifting sands, dangerous shoals and tidal estuaries. In fact, James Cook is such a promising prospect that in December 1752, at the age of 24, he sits and passes the formal exams to be a mate, one of the captain's officers, and in 1755, when young James is now an imposing 26-year-old man of no little accomplishment, after completing 16 voyages without blemish, John Walker even offers to make him captain of the Whitby Cat Friendship, on which he is currently serving. But again, Cook surprises. For as global tension between the imperial giants, Britain and France, rises over trade, territory, and established colonies, it becomes obvious that armed confrontation beckons, not merely a fight between countries, but an actual world war. And one cold morning in the late spring of 1755, just as the Friendship sails up the Thames, the attention of the young mariner is drawn to a bustle of men on the wharf at Wapping. What is going on? There appears to be a group of armed, uniformed men from the Royal Navy escorting a gaggle of dishevelled and clearly unhappy merchant sailors along the wharf to a waiting carriage. Oh, it is a press gang, a forced rounding up of young merchant sailors to man Royal Navy ships as Great Britain prepares to force the issue with France over their North American colonies. Britain is moving from a peace footing to a war footing. Perhaps it is only a matter of time before all merchantmen will be so compelled. Why wait? Watching as these sailors are bustled along the wharf, Cook comes to a key decision. He will decline Mr. Walker's offer of captaincy and volunteer in the Royal Navy. Despite the fact he is now on the edge of everything he has been working for, and more, becoming the captain of a ship, Cook has looked at the life of such captains, endlessly trawling familiar waters with dull coal, and has decided he can do much better. For James Cook is quietly developing another key attribute: ambition, a stirring in his soul that he can do something not done before, achieve things undreamt of by anyone, let alone one of low birth. But he will need to take real risks to achieve this ambition. He will need, once more, to throw away certainty for the lure of adventure, the hope of glory. Somehow this man of such humble beginnings, James Cook, has decided that even something so vaulted as being the captain of a ship in the merchant navy is not enough for him. He can do better still, for he wants to be an officer in His Majesty's Royal Navy. Of course, it is highly unlikely that he could ever make captain, for such an exalted post is simply never reached by the lower orders, but simply to be an officer of the quarter-deck would be an extraordinary achievement. Beyond that, he wants adventure. There is no doubt that war is looming, and so he promptly resigns. 3 days later, the muster roll of one of His Majesty's fleet of the Royal Navy, HMS Eagle, records the arrival of a 26-year-old sailor more unremarkable than a stray dog. 161, from London Rendezvous, James Cook. Rating AB, able seaman. Date of entry June 17th, 1755. James Cook doesn't mind the able seaman's dismal wage of £1 4 a month, or the demotion from his rank of mate in the merchant fleet, as it is a sacrifice he's willing to make, content to begin again and trust that he will rise on merit. After all, while advancement in the British Army frequently turns on your class, your familial and classmate connections, the latter all the more powerful depending on what school or university you graduated from, the Royal Navy is much more open. So esoteric are many of the skills required, so dependent on hours spent at sea actually sailing a ship, that tried and true sailors of sufficiently sound character are likely to rise to the position of master's mate, or even master, even if, like Cook, they come from origins as humble as a garden potato. Chapter 1. The Royal Navy. The Royal Navy of England hath ever been its greatest defence and ornament. It is its ancient and natural strength, the floating bulwark of our island. William Blackstone, Justice of Court of the King's Bench, 1765. Mr. Cook frequently expressed to me the obligation he was under to Captain Simcoe, and on my meeting him in London, he confessed most candidly that the several improvements and instructions he had received on board the Pembroke had been the sole foundation of the services he had been enabled to perform. Samuel Holland, on Cook's time under Captain Simcoe. So on the scene of our scrutiny into this busy age steps the figure of Joseph Banks, the gifted and fortunate youth. Enthusiastic, curious, the voyager, the disciple of Linnaeus, the botanist and zoologist, the devotee of savages. Not yet, as one examines his early career, a public figure, but certainly a gentleman, certainly a figure typical of his age, and certainly, as much as anyone, and more than most, the gentleman amateur of science. J.C. Beaglehole, The Endeavour Journal of Joseph Banks, 1768 to 1771. July 1755. HMS Eagle. The Channel, a tall ship and a star to steer her by. The tall and imposing figure standing at the prow of HMS Eagle, one of His Majesty's ships, a 1,222-ton ship of the line carrying 58 guns, radiates pride and ability. James Cook has taken to life in the Royal Navy with great gusto, enormous diligence, and even greater delight, and has already hugely impressed his commander, Captain Joseph Haymar. For while it is one thing for Haymar to have a skeleton crew substantially filled by those who have been press-ganged, it is quite another to have a more than competent young man who wants to be there, and really knows what he is doing. For the real problem the good captain has been experiencing is that most of those press-ganged are landlubbers, not seamen, and are consequently both distressed to be on board and uninterested in learning any sea skills. Captain Haymar has already written his concerns to the Admiralty, the London Land Office of the Lords of the Sea, those who not only rule the waves, but also the lives of every British sailor, from cabin boy to admiral. I do not believe there is a worse manned ship in the Navy. It means that James Cook is precious indeed, and from the first day had stood out to the captain as a real sailor, a brilliant diamond in the landlubber roughs, even a shiny shilling among dull pennies. It is not just that he knows what to do, it is that he even has a way with the men, an understanding of the common man, for he clearly is one himself, which allows him to coax out of them work that even the captain struggles to extract. And so, just 1 month and 7 days after signing on to the Royal Navy, able seaman James Cook has been made Master's Mate James Cook, if you please, and carefully records that fact in his understated way, in his first journal of record. Logbook on board His Majesty's ship Eagle, kept by James Cook, Master's Mate, commencing 27th June, 1755. It is a key breakthrough, clearly a sign that the captain considers Cook to be warrant officer material, perhaps one day a master himself, as Master's Mate is a key lower rung on that ladder for competent seamen who are not gentlemen. Whereas if you are high-born and went to the right school, you're liable to be made, even with no seamanship, one of the midshipmen, so called because these junior commissioned officers berth amidships, based on your pedigree. So be it. It is not in Cook's nature to bridle against the unfairness of the class system. He just wants to work, understand more, and get better at what he does. On this day he turns from the prancing white horses of the frothy waves that lie ahead on the Channel and looks back at the receding vision of Portsmouth. It is wonderful to be at sea on such an exciting mission, his first venture into a war arena, as they must patrol between Southern Ireland and the Scilly Islands, with orders to intercept and capture any French ships of war that they encounter. The bonus for Cook is the actual bounty he will collect as his share of the spoils, should they capture any French vessels. It's a potential fortune, which encourages every captain to engage. As it turns out, the misadventure of a broken mast during a bad storm means this first mission is all too brief, and just 4 weeks later the Admiralty replaces Captain Haymar with a man of considerably more firepower, 32-year-old Captain Hugh Palliser, the son of an army captain, and herewith his instant rapport with Cook, a Yorkshireman. They both know what it is to be branded with the first sound out of your mouth as Yorkshireman, and they are proud of that brand. Stubborn, industrious, and proud of their humility as only a Yorkshireman can be. Other sailors might look blankly at Captain Palliser when he says, "Put wood in hole." But Cook grew up in a house where his father said that all the time and knows to shut the door. He is more than happy to have Captain Palliser as his gaffer, boss, and works each day and into the evening hours until he is completely jiggered, exhausted. Their bond is as instant as it is deep, and while on their first voyage, this time patrolling the western approaches to the Channel, Palliser makes time to instruct the eager young fellow on the practical aspects of navigation, the many things that Cook has not been able to pick up from his book studies. Before long, he is methodically recording observations so that he can begin drawing charts that show an accurate outline of the coast. And now James takes this sextant and shoots the sun, measuring the angle of the sun above the horizon at a specific time to calculate our latitude. Night after night, after mess, when the ship is secure under watch, Captain Palliser sits up late with this enthusiastic student of the sea, talking all matters maritime, including how science is closing in on achieving the holy grail of navigation, longitude, how far they are to the east or west of the meridian line passing through Greenwich outside London, which is far more difficult to assess than the latitude. And of course, Captain Palliser is also an able tutor in such grand traditions of the Royal Navy as always passing the port to the left and sliding it along the table, so that not a drop is spilled even in heavy seas, and in fact even when you're on land. In similar spirit, while the first toast of the night will always be "God Save the King," it was after King Charles II himself was returning to England on the Royal Charles and hit his head on the low ceiling of the captain's cabin when replying to a toast that he personally established the tradition for officers of the Royal Navy to remain seated for the toast. Superstitions? There are many, but always remember, stop a glass ringing and save a man's life. The idea being that if a glass is bumped and starts to ring, you must immediately put your finger on it to stop it, as somewhere in the world a sailor's life is threatened. Yes, perhaps a silly superstition, but do it anyway. So much to learn. In November 1755, the bond between Captain Palliser and master's mate Cook is deepened further when the captain rides shotgun with young Cook through his first naval battle, though it is less a real battle than giving a good pounding to a storm-ravaged French warship they find in the Bay of Biscay. The French surrender, but their ship is not worth saving, so the British set her afire. The worthy and always humane Captain Palliser, a captain's captain that a young naval man could always get his bearings for life from, has his crew take the Eagle's small boats to pick up 26 of the some 200 surviving Frenchmen. James Cook records the day in his log with typically even temperament. Received on board from the Esperance 26 prisoners at 4 o'clock. Esperance on fire, and there being no possibility of keeping her above water. As she sinks beneath the waves, so too does any chance of a bounty. But as Great Britain and France declare war 6 months later, they'd effectively been at war for 18 months, but until then neither had bothered with a formal declaration. There will be more opportunities to come. Indeed, the following year James Cook and his good captain have the Eagles swoop, all guns blazing, on a 50-gun French ship, Duc d'Aquitaine, just 2 days out of Plymouth, which they capture after a 45-minute clash. Who can take the French ship back to port? Why, that would be, of course, master's mate James Cook, and he arrives a wealthier man than he's ever been, courtesy of his share of the bounty, in his case £15, more than half of his annual pay of £28 14 shillings. So it goes for the remarkable James Cook. By October 1757, just before his 29th birthday, he receives his first warrant, making him no less than Master James Cook of HMS Pembroke. In just a decade, labourer's son James Cook has gone from a boy whose maritime experience was no more than the wetness behind his ears as he set foot on a merchant Whitby cat for the first time, 2. Master in the Royal Navy, generally regarded as the highest naval office that a non-gentleman might aspire to. The master is usually the one in control of a ship's navigation, setting the best course, keeping the logbook, inspecting all stores and provisions, observing coasts, shoals, and rocks. In other words, he is the chief executive officer on board, often getting paid more than the lieutenants and surgeons, while the gentleman captain merely oversees the whole operation. The Pembroke's commander is Captain John Simcoe, a Royal Navy man who, as well as being an experienced naval commander, with a reputation as a fighting captain, is a devoted man of science, well versed in the art of navigation and forever reading the latest advances in the area. Like Palliser, Simcoe is ahead of the Admiralty on this, and has realised sooner than my lords that proficiency in navigation is the key to unlocking the world, and it can only come through dedicated training by experts. What is more, Captain Simcoe is by nature both ambitious and accomplished, having received his lieutenant's commission at the ripe age of 28, and seeing the same ambition in his new master, takes him under his wing and resolves to teach his willing pupil all that he can. Another bonus for Cook in being master of a newly built 60-gun ship of 1,222 tons is the long voyage it promises, the direct fulfilment of his earliest dreams back in Staithes. Soon he will be setting out on a long voyage across a vast ocean, on this occasion no less than the mighty Atlantic. He could be slicing sides of bacon or measuring lengths of tartan for an old Yorkshire biddy, perhaps still sleeping under a dark counter. But here he is master of his fate, and captain of his soul for some time already. But now he is also master of HMS Pembroke. The sea has been good to him. There can be few things more impressive than a gathering of His Majesty's grand ships of the line sailing off to serve Britain, and this morning, 22nd of February 1758, is a case in point, as no fewer than 15 of them leave Plymouth bound for North America, and an upcoming battle with the French and their native allies. William Pitt, Great Britain's Secretary of State, has ordered the combined British naval and land forces to wrest control of the major fort at Louisbourg on Ile Royale, before sailing up the St. Lawrence River to capture Quebec. Thus shall Britain put a definitive end to the interests of the haughty and strutting French in North America. Louisbourg is a fortress town, established for purely military purposes, and sits menacingly at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, the critical artery that delivers the lifeblood to the French colony's beating heart, Quebec, the capital of New France. It is garrisoned by about 3,000 regulars, 1,000 armed inhabitants, and a band of Indians. Up on the walls are mounted 219 cannon and 17 mortars, while below in the harbour 5 ships of the line and 7 frigates manned by 3,000 men bristle with a total of 546 guns. If the English can take Louisbourg, and so prevent supply to the heavily garrisoned Quebec, then it can only be a matter of time before they can sail the fleet up the St. Lawrence and take Quebec too. The Grand Armada looks majestic as the ships make their way through the Channel and onwards to the Atlantic, and down there, sailing among them, is HMS Pembroke. Look closely on the quarter-deck. You see that austere yet elegant-looking man standing by Captain John Simcoe, over 6 feet tall and well-built, looking shipshape in his pristine warrant officer's uniform? He's too busy with his duties to be on the prow for this magnificent moment, but it's him all right, the humble Yorkshireman, Master James Cook. And oh, how his eyes glitter just to look at the mighty warships flanking his own. His first long voyage, across the Atlantic, to the New World. And yet, such is the nature of long voyages at sea. The shine turns to rust with time. The wind in the sails of the fresh seafarer blows out, After 6 weeks of battering headway against oncoming waves and gales, of eating stale food and drinking oft slimy water, many of those aboard this armada are beginning to suffer the scourge of scurvy, a foe far more devastating and persistent than the French. Aboard the Pembroke, dozens of sailors with swollen gums and aching joints are incapable of rising from their berths. Within days, one afflicted sailor dies in his hammock, toothless and bloated. Many more follow. Most frustrating for Cook, a problem solver and a man of action who has never seen so many healthy men struck down so quickly, is that the disease has no seeming cause, no rhyme in time or reason from season. It hits day and night, as shipmate after shipmate starts to feel the dreaded stiffness in his joints and the swelling of his gums, which always mark the onset of the oft-fatal illness. Soon splotchy blotches of purple start to appear on thighs and legs, and often turn into suppurating stinking sores that make even friends turn away in horror and fear. Teeth fall out, and the skin takes on a lifeless pallor, even as nostrils, lips, and anus suffer from prolonged bleeding. Shocking cases of diarrhoea, never welcome at the best of times, but a disaster in the confined spaces of a ship, with men sleeping on hammocks, run through the ship's company on the lower decks. But there is nothing Master Cook and his fellow officers can do to stop it. A devastating 26 men out of their crew of 324 succumb to the infamous sailor's disease, to be buried at sea in ceremonies where all are clearly wondering who will be next. Almost as if he is the chosen one, however, as if the gods have chosen to smile upon him, none of the horror touches James Cook. His robust constitution holds as strong as ever, and his capacity to bear hardship shines for all to see, even as his seafaring skills continue to leap forward with remarkable alacrity, powered by his acute intellect and his drive to improve himself. What doesn't leap forward is the Pembroke, as it must proceed westwards into the teeth of contrary winds, and it is not until the second week of May 1758, 11 weeks after departure, on a journey that was meant to take just 3 weeks, that Captain John Simcoe finally orders the anchor to be dropped in the deep harbour at Halifax, Nova Scotia. Dozens of the crew are immediately rushed to the naval hospital, and half a dozen of those who remain that evening steal the Pembroke's yawl and desert. It leaves the ship so unalterably undermanned that, at the end of the month, it cannot sail out of Halifax with the rest of the 157 vessels of the British fleet bound for the battle at Louisbourg. It is no less than a month before the Pembroke can muster the manpower through local press-ganging to get going again, and when they drop anchor at Garbarus Bay, a few miles west of Louisbourg, they drop into that grinding, still state of conflict known as a siege. The French are content to wait, however, knowing that the rocky spine of the coast will serve as insurance against any incursion from the Pembroke and its ilk. And what have they to worry about? The Pembroke settles solemnly into place with a fleet of 30 ships of the line, flanked by frigates, sloops, and fireships, vessel upon vessel. The 12,600 troops land to prosecute the siege, while on the ships, bobbing, waiting, enduring the endless boredom that sieges provide in abundance, are 8,000 sailors. The French have noted that despite this, yes, some English may have already landed south of Louisbourg with heavy artillery. But it is no matter. Their arrival will amount to a pinprick, not a punch. There is precious little chance that the French walls shall be breached by foot, and no chance by sail or oar. What the French do not know is that their citadel is already under siege, not by men, but by maps. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, on the 25th of July, 1758. Securely hidden under a comforting blanket of fog and darkness, some 50 boats filled with 600 British sailors from the Pembroke and other ships make their way into the bay at Louisbourg. The men on the oars row as silently as possible, each oar slipping beneath the surface and pulled with a muffled grunt. They come up alongside the 2 French warships charged with guarding Louisbourg. In the dark, British sailors shinny up ropes to the deck above. In his log, James Cook reports the night's events. 50 boats, manned and armed, rowed into the harbour, in order to cut away the men of war and tow them into the northeast harbour, on which they did, viz. The Bienfaisant of 64 guns, the Prudent being aground, she was set on fire, at which the firing ceased on both sides. The next day, 26th of July, 1758, the French governor of Ile Royale hauls up the white flag above Louisbourg's stone fortress, and the British now have control over both the Gulf and the river mouth, with one significant problem to overcome before they can reach their goal of capturing Quebec, further upriver. That is, they have nothing beyond a single rudimentary chart of the St. Lawrence River, done by an Englishman. Its title, Exact Chart of the River St. Lawrence, is patently absurd, and they know nothing of its shoals, tides, and outcrops, and nor do they have any idea of the lie of the land surrounding the new French capital. The most urgent task now for General James Wolfe of the Army and Admiral Saunders of the Navy is to find the safest route for the fleet to move upriver, as well as the best cove to secure so they can land their infantry and artillery en masse. And although the French have direction buoys littered along the river to guide their own boats, they will surely remove them, with the threat of the British Lion at their doorstep. Wolfe has just the man for the job, and calls up his brilliant engineer and master military surveyor, Lieutenant Samuel Holland, to begin charting the area around the Gulf of St. Lawrence and the river, and moving up as far as he dare, as close to Quebec as possible, so they can form a plan based on solid information. Snapping off a salute, Lieutenant Holland is quickly on his way to collect his instruments from his quarters.
This ends CD 1. CD 2.
27th of July, 1758. Kennington Cove. The master pieces it together. For now, at least, this fleet of the Royal Navy is able to drop anchor in the harbour that lies below Louisbourg, and disgorge its sailors and soldiers into the fort, as well as the town itself. Master James Cook, with some unexpected time on his hands, goes on land to look around Kennington Cove, just south of Louisbourg, where the British troops and artillery were first landed back in June. Now, usually when he had any spare time, he would retire to a quiet spot to delve deeply into the intricacies of highly complicated mathematics and endless wonders of astronomy, both key to honing his navigational skills. But on this day, he is going for a walk along the recently conquered shore, which is littered with the debris of tens of British boats, smashed up by the heavy surf during the landings, when he stops and stares. Pray tell, what is that? And who is that? What is that figure in yonder dunes doing? It proves to be a lieutenant from His Majesty's army, with some sort of contraption in front of him. It looks like a tripod, atop which is a metallic square, like the top of a table, supporting a triangular instrument, which the man keeps adjusting before scribbling something upon the table-like surface. Whereupon he fidgets with the instrument atop the square once more, then scribbles again, and again, and again. Cook stands quietly staring, until the inevitable. Presently, the other officer becomes aware of a tall figure hovering close. Yes? It is a Master James Cook of HMS Pembroke, sir, and he is eager to know what is going on, for it is all double-Dutched to him. Captain Lieutenant Samuel Holland grins to hear it. Holland is a Dutchman, an accomplished surveyor and military engineer so highly regarded he has become General Wolfe's engineer of choice for all thorny problems, despite being foreign-born. It's just James Cook's luck to not only come across him at this time, but that Holland is of a friendly disposition, surprised at the interest shown by this naval officer of about his age, but happy to answer questions. After all, most of Holland's own contemporaries have turned their backs on his complex obsession as a military surveyor, whatever that is. The mathematics of it all tends to send their minds reeling into confusion. So yes, he is happy to talk to Master Cook and explain his occupation. Now look, what I have here is a plane table. With this device, backed by deep concentration, the patience of Job, and a knowledge of mathematics, an extraordinary thing can be accomplished. You can develop a precise map which will allow you to formulate an equally precise plan of attack. Do you see? Cook's eyes narrow, his thick brows furrowing. No words are needed. Holland knows the question behind that face. How, sir? Holland beams to have found such a willing pupil. He gestures to the setup in front of him and begins to explain. Well, the method is called triangulation, and it relies on the plane table, this flat square here on top of the tripod, being absolutely horizontal, which you can ensure by virtue of this spirit level. With a sheet of paper secured to the top of the plane table, we next use this alidade, like a telescope and a ruler in one, to record the angle from our current position to particular features like yonder headlands, river entrance, and beaches. And now, here's the thing. By now moving the plane table a known precise distance, as if along the base of a very long triangle, and taking different angles to the same features, and marking the points those lines intersect, we can work out their precise distances from each other and our plane table. An accurate map starts to form up beneath your very fingers. If you do this while on a ship, taking constant angles and measurements, you can map an entire coastline with superb accuracy. You've surely learnt that as a master in the Navy. James Cook shakes his head regretfully. No, he has not. He has heard of the concept from Captain Palliser mostly, but as far as he knows, His Majesty's Royal Navy has no interest and an equal number of instruments. As to surveying features of the land, it is not even discussed in naval circles, and yet, to his credit, James Cook immediately recognises how learning Holland's sophisticated land surveying techniques could revolutionise the work of the Royal Navy. He has chanced upon the man to know in the world of land surveying. A lantern has been illuminated above his head, and he suddenly understands the significance of Holland's work. To this point, most charts that he has both seen and roughly sketched under Captain Palliser's instruction have been just that, rough, no more than an indication of the contours of a coastline as seen by the naked eye and scrawled by an untrained hand. A hit-and-miss affair, whereby if you trusted the map of a shoreline, let's say, you were just as likely to hit a cruel reef as to miss a dangerous shoal, and to finish on a fatal shore. To this point, working in the coal trade and navy alike, a premium is always placed on the old salts, those sailors who personally know each nook and cranny of the coastline, who know where the dangers lie in the harbour entrance at low tide. They've seen friends lost on those reefs, and will never forget the agony of hitting them. But if a map could be precise, a thing to be trusted rather than warily consulted, if they could achieve that for nautical charts, why, such a thing could transform the world of the sailor, and perhaps even open up the unknown world to one willing to embrace this new way. Cook is just such a man, and begs Holland to give him more in-depth instruction. Please, do go on, Lieutenant Holland. The Dutchman does, and is thrilled as Cook questions him closely, noting the Englishman's keen intelligence, hunger to learn, and quick grasp of the essentials. In fact, Cook is so keen that Holland instantly makes him an offer. As I am currently tasked with surveying and charting not just the town of Louisbourg, but the whole of St. Lawrence Bay and its shoreline, including as much of the river as possible, in preparation for the British land and naval attack on Quebec City,
Would you like to be one of my assistants and learn on the job? We have one imprecise English chart and some French charts newly seized from Louisbourg, but at first glance they look hopelessly inaccurate, and we can certainly not trust the lives of our men and fate of our ships to their accuracy. We need to move fast and form accurate new charts. Will you help? Well, Cook would love to, and on the spot, Holland organises a meeting with Cook for the next day in order to make him acquainted with the whole process. The next day, bright and early, Cook returns to shore with the permission of Captain Simcoe, along with an invitation from the same for Holland to come this evening to dine on the Pembroke with the captain and Master Cook, not forgetting to bring the plain table pieces along. Despite his own vast experience, even Captain Simcoe has never come across or even heard of this plain table that has his brilliant master in such a stir, and is eager to see it. Lieutenant Holland and Master Cook spend an interesting and satisfying day surveying the shoreline of Gabarus Bay, where some of the fleet is still at anchor. Holland delights in teaching his willing pupil, whom he will ever after regard as one of the sharpest minds with whom he has dealt. That evening, Holland is further impressed when, after accepting Captain Simcoe's invitation to dine, he notes that the Pembroke's great cabin is nothing less than an incubator for science and learning. These particular English officers are a rare breed, devoted to improving their knowledge and determined to gather books, charts, instruments, and, yes, people. The Dutchman further delights to find in Captain Simcoe another keen intellect, as well as a man of great wisdom and experience. For his part, Simcoe is impressed by Holland, and entirely agrees with young Cook. This is a man from whom his master can learn an enormous amount, but his significance goes well beyond that. The art he is teaching has the potential to change marine navigation deeply. From this day forth, Cook is consumed with the business of surveying and making charts, and, after fulfilling his official duties every day, fills every hour he can with both refining his craft and executing it in the service of Great Britain. The charts they are making will be key to the capture of Quebec, and the service of science, mathematics, navigation, and draftsmanship. Summer 1758, Revesby Abbey, to the manor born. For you can't but be sensible that there is a great inattention in him, and an immoderate love of play, which we must endeavour to get the better of in some degree, or it will be a constant obstacle to his improvement. This sometimes occasions quarrels between us, though in other respects we agree extremely well together, as I really think him a very good-tempered and well-disposed boy. Assistant Master at Eton, Edward Young, in a letter to William Banks, the father of Joseph Banks, in February 1757. On this beautiful day, as a jaunty, tireless 15-year-old lad, lithe of limb and fresh of face, with the constitution of an ox, Joseph Banks is intent on enjoying his holidays from Eton out in the sunshine and fresh air, without a care in the world. As a matter of fact, as the scion of a family as long established in these parts as it is wealthy, with a whole string of estates, there are few things that concern Joseph in the first place. Everything is taken care of for him, and on this day he is strolling along a quaint country lane near his family's large and stately home, Revesby Abbey, a rather heavy, graceless mass of a manor set on a vast 340-acre estate in Lincolnshire, with vast woods behind, vast fens in front, surrounds that offer unlimited opportunity for fishing, one of young Joe's favourite hobbies. After spending a wonderful afternoon bathing in the river with his friends, Joseph finds the light of the setting sun strikes perfectly on the wildflowers lining his path: pansies, violets, mignonette, hollyhocks, marigold, lavender, and monk's hood, no less than the path of his future. For now, in a moment he will remember ever afterwards,
he stops and stares at the sheer wondrous beauty of the flowers and foliage that flank his steps. The colour of these blossoms, the variety, the patterns in all their splendour. Yes, he has walked these green lanes all his life, but never has he seen revealed what he sees now, this impossibly glorious array of colours, arranged in mysterious order. "How beautiful," he says to himself. "Would it not be far more reasonable to make me learn the nature of these plants than the Greek and Latin I am confined to?" Right here and now he resolves to become a student of the natural world, his mind blossoming at the very idea of blossoms. Starting now. Skipping on just a little further down the lane, he comes across, an old woman collecting wild herbs and flowers, known locally as culling simples, to be sold to the local apothecaries. "What is the name of that flower?" he asks her, only to see her wrinkles of wisdom rising in surprise at the vision of a young gentleman of just 15 years taking an interest in her humble labours. All these years, and here again is something new she has never experienced before. She tells this young gentleman with the flowing auburn hair that goes all the way to his shoulders the name of the flower, and then stoops back down to work. But the boy stays, hovering over her. "What is that one?" he persists, pointing at the plant she is pulling out from the earth, its dirt-covered roots hanging limp like the hair of a vagabond. The old woman, knowing the boy comes from the old abbey estate just up the way, is shrewd. "For the princely sum of 6pence I will teach you all I know of these wild flowers, their seasons, and where they can be collected." The lad nods enthusiastically and hurries home to tell his bemused parents, William and Sarah Banks. Their lad is interested in what? Plants? Herbs? Wild flowers? It's all a bit common. Besides which, in his whole life, young Joseph has only ever shown interest in games and sports, like fishing and cricket on the village green, until this. It is all very odd. Still, they agree to indulge at this strange new passion, so long as he promises not to drop behind in his lessons. Done. And it is not a passing fancy. The next morning, the sun creeping over their sprawling Lincoln estate finds Joseph crawling, gathering wildflowers, and soon enough, insects, butterflies, beetles, and whatever other wonders of nature he can find. After several weeks, Joseph's stern father thinks this natural history fad of his son's has all gone too far, and insists the lad spend more time reading his Greek and Latin at his desk than meandering outdoors. Joseph's mother, Sarah, however, decides to actively encourage his strange pursuit. Certainly, they are gentry, but they are landed gentry, which means the lad has grown up fairly earthy to begin with, surrounded by animals and not afraid to get his hands dirty. And after all, she may well have been responsible for his lack of fear of even the ugliest side of nature in the first place. As a wee one, he would take toads into his hands and bring them right into contact with his nose and face, with her complete blessing, as she had always insisted that the toad is actually a harmless animal, and to whose manner of life man is certainly under some obligation, as its food is chiefly those insects which devour his crops and annoy him in various ways. It is just the way his beloved mother is, and before long she gives him a copy of the iconic Gerard's Herbal or General History of Plants to consult, which he does every day thereafter, taking it back to Eton, where its pages are soon ripped, earmarked and smudged with both soil and the sweat from his dripping brow from an afternoon's exertion. Back in the boarding house at Eton, few friends understand this latest obsession of Joe Banks, but they too watch his love of natural history, the study of animal, mineral and vegetable, grow with bemusement rather than disdain. A charismatic and popular lad among his peers, Joe is even able to convince that fine fellow Henry Brougham to come out botanizing with him. Decades later, Brougham would fondly reminisce to his son about those lazy, hazy afternoons collecting flowers, leaves, and whole plants with Joe. He was a remarkably fine-looking, strong and active boy, whom no fatigue could subdue, and no peril daunt. His whole time out of school was given up to hunting plants and insects, making a hortus siccus of the one and forming a cabinet of the other. As often as Banks could induce me to quit my tasks in reading or in verse-making, he would take me on his long rambles. It's no wonder Brougham kept so many butterflies, beetles, and other insects, as well as a cabinet of shells and fossils in his home for the rest of his days. As to young Joseph, at the time, however, his whole attitude to his formal studies has changed. He used to feel a bit bad about his lack of ardour for his classical studies, as though he was letting his teachers and parents down. But what does he care now? He has all of natural history to study, a discipline of practical import, now opening up like a gorgeous rose in early spring. Something he can read about and do, outdoors. And though he is learning rapidly on a scale never before reached in his life, understanding the basic foundation stones on which the study of nature is based, it just doesn't feel like study used to. This is not a chore, it is a positive joy. And yes, his teacher and his father become ever more frustrated at his waning reports, especially as they know what potential he has, as one so obviously highly intelligent. But their disappointment does not even make a scratch on the surface of his deep satisfaction. He is learning so much of so many wondrous things. His teachers continue to argue, but Joseph cares not. From now, he will do only the bare minimum of what is required in his formal lessons, while reserving his passion for his natural history studies, indulging a little more in his particular passion for the botanical world more than the animal and mineral. And yes, perhaps it does come at a certain cost, in that the more time he spends botanizing, the less time he has to learn the social mores for a man of his position, for it will later be noted of him by the leading salon sophisticate of the latter part of 18th century London, Fanny Burney, that if instead of going around the world he had only fallen from the moon, he could not appear less versed in the usual modes of a tea-drinking party, while another contemporary would observe, his manners are rather coarse and heavy. But he simply doesn't care, don't you see? He wants to botanize, and that is that is that. Winter 1758-59. Halifax, Nova Scotia. Chartered account. It is so cold even the ice is shivering. For sailors the cold creeps from the depths, stalks the ship, engulfs it, and in the silent watch of the night finally works its way into not just the marrow of their bones, but into their very souls. Shaking, shuddering, they emerge on deck in the morning to brave constant freezing storms and squalls that howl down upon them, leaving snow on even the low peaks. All around them, the Arctic currents and sub-zero temperatures are forming sea ice that infests the shallow waters close to land, and threatens to block the British fleet's entry to the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And yet it is not merely the gelid gloom which persuades the British admirals and generals of the wisdom in waiting until the following summer before launching their planned attack on Quebec, for they have captured Louisbourg too late in the season. The St. Lawrence River will soon be frozen over until spring comes to thaw it the next year. The only useful thing that can be done meantime is to prepare charts of the route up the river, at least as far up as the wall of ice. With frozen eyes, thus, the British brass looks to the likes of Lieutenant Holland and the inexhaustible master James Cook to do what needs to be done, to begin surveying the whole area and keep doing so through what looks likely to be the coldest North American winter on record. Though he is desperately cold, James Cook does not particularly care. As one who cut his maritime teeth in the North and Baltic seas in even more challenging conditions, with waves as tall as pine trees thundering down upon you for days on end, the current conditions are luxurious. Yes, of course it's cold, but when you are bobbing at anchor in a safe and well-supplied harbour, it is nothing to complain about. And in any case, the task at hand is not only one he was born to, but, as he prefers constant industry to idleness of any sort, his spirits lift even further. Given there are so few other official duties to engage him over this terrible winter, and the Pembroke is at anchor in a safe harbour, the ever-kind Captain John Simcoe, himself taken a little ill with the bitter cold, allows James Cook to dedicate his every waking hour, and even a few hours that ordinarily would have been devoted to sleeping, to surveying. Hence the dim figure you can see right there every morning at the barest glimmer of first light, being rowed away from the Pembroke in a longboat all the way to Gasp Bay at the southern head of the entrance to the St. Lawrence River. Landing on this rocky shore, he carefully sets up the plane table and sighting rule he has borrowed from Lieutenant Holland, and all day long, right until just before sunset, works away on his chart, the first full survey he has attempted alone. He wants it to be perfect. As he grows more confident, Cook even adds some techniques of his own, eschewing Lieutenant Holland's exclusively land-based trigonometric surveying to take the boat out and survey different features from the sea itself. At other times, he has his crew carry large and colourful flags to various points, so he can measure different angles to distinct points rather than amorphous masses. He also keeps the crew busy by taking soundings at various points, so he can include this data too, in a comprehensive land-sea survey. It is slow, painstaking work, but bit by bit the chart forms up beneath his ever more skilled hands, recording every peak, every bluff, every promontory or point of interest. The plane tabling and the soundings correct and elaborate on the existing charts, taking precise soundings and sailing directions. When, by late November, the cold becomes so severe that it actually threatens to freeze the British fleet in at the Gulf of St. Lawrence, most of the ships are ordered by the Admiralty to return to Halifax until spring. At least it also guarantees that no French ships will be able to get through the sea ice that guards the newly captured Louisbourg. Winter brings peace for both sides, and time to prepare for the battles to come. In Halifax, Holland and Cook use the Pembroke's great cabin, a room with so many books they practically counted as cargo, for their masterwork, the complete chart of the mouth of the St. Lawrence River, and the safest way for the fleet to get there. Day after day and into the night, the three men, for Captain Simcoe, though ailing with pneumonia, joins them, work on their chart as they consult all of their notes and previous measurements and bring them to bear on this one master copy. It is a room unlike any other on a Royal Navy ship, just as these are unlikely officers of the Royal Navy. As Holland himself will later recall of Simcoe's great cabin aboard the Pembroke, dedicated to scientific purposes and mostly taken up with a drawing table, it furnished no room for idlers. His bushy eyebrows practically throwing wispy shadows, Captain Simcoe is like the wise old man of the three. No, he is not versed in the latest techniques, but he does have decades of experience in drawing charts to bring to the plane table, and is able to make great contributions to the emerging chart. For his part, Holland brings his own sharp mind, commitment to precision, and vast practical experience of land surveying and chart-making, enlightening his new friends about the latest innovations. Under the tutelage of Captain Simcoe and Holland, James Cook remains the eager pupil, reserved but relentless, but both of his teachers recognise not just his talent, but what is likely his genius, as the chart takes shape. What soon becomes obvious is that the chart they have been using really is, as Holland expresses it, so erroneously heretofore laid down that Captain Simcoe sends a missive to the Admiralty insisting that all of Newfoundland, and indeed the whole northeast coastline, needs a fresh survey. "I've mentioned to several of my friends in power," he tells Master Cook one day, in the great cabin, "the necessity of having surveys of these parts and astronomical observations made as soon as peace is restored." With which, looking earnestly at his master through his rheumy eyes, he says, "I recommend you make yourself competent to the business by learning spherical trigonometry and the practical part of astronomy," and hands him a book, Leadbetter's A Complete System of Astronomy, published in 1728. James Cook runs his palm across the leather cover, still listening to his captain, then opens to the front contents page. Containing the description and use of the laws of spherical geometry, the projection of the sphere orthographically and stereographically upon the planes of the meridian, ecliptic, and horizon, the doctrine of the sphere, and the eclipses of the sun and moon for 37 years. When Captain Simcoe takes his leave, gone to rest again as his health is only getting worse, James Cook sits down and begins to read Leadbetter's book, the first of many readings. The author begins, "There have been great contentions among the learned of different nations about the origin of this study, everyone claiming an interest in it. As the Babylonians, Egyptians, Grecians, Scythians, etc., but be that as it will, we now enjoy it in a very clear light, to the immortal honour of those two great geometricians, the late Sir Isaac Newton and Dr. Edmund Halley, our present Astronomer Royal. Upon this science depend navigation, geography, and dialling, without which 'tis impossible they should be maintained. For first, the mariner cannot conduct a ship through the unbeaten paths of the ocean with the help of it. But being well skilled in astronomy, he may, by the knowledge of eclipses, the immersions and immersions of Jupiter's satellites, and the times and transits of the moon, by the fixed stars and planets, determine the true longitude found at sea. And for this reason I would advise every man who has the care of a ship or of a school, that he both well inform himself, and also those under his instructions, of the following work." James Cook is immediately engrossed, just as he is soon also absorbed by studying another of Captain Simcoe's recommendations, the work of Euclid, the father of geometry. While all of his maritime comrades complain bitterly about the winter of early 1759, as it immobilizes them and keeps them on shore, Cook is in his hay, refining his art. "During that hard winter," he will later recall, "I first read Euclid and applied myself to the study of mathematics and astronomy, without any other assistance than what a few books and my own industry afforded me. And yet even as Cook's mind continues to open to the possibilities of the earth and its position in the universe vis-à-vis the sun and the other planets, so too does the earth continue to orbit that sun in such a manner that by early May 1759 the weather has so warmed that Admiral Charles Saunders gives the orders to his British fleet, sail for St. Lawrence. Within a month, an intimidating 35 ships of the line, flanked by numerous smaller men-of-war and transports, a grand armada of 200 ships, sail out of the safe port of Halifax to begin the journey to Quebec. For his part, James Cook is filled with pride and wonder to see among this grand fleet of His Majesty's Royal Navy no fewer than 50 capacious, steady and sturdy, humble and hard-working Whitby cats being used as troop transports. Cook is as dour as a day in deep December, because, even while thrilled to be paving the way for this grand armada aboard the Pembroke, he is aware that the man to whom he owes so much, Captain Simcoe, is so gravely ill that he is confined to his cabin. By his bedside, not long afterwards, the ship's surgeon is so sure of what will happen soon that he asks the beloved commander if he wishes his body preserved for a burial ashore. Simcoe looks his doctor right in the eyes, and, with feeble breath, rasps a reply that will be long celebrated. Apply your pitch to its proper purpose. Keep your lead to mend the shot holes, and commit me to the deep." A truly worthy officer of His Majesty's Royal Navy right to the bitter end, the 49-year-old Captain John Simcoe finally breathes his rasping last on the 16th of May, 1759. Typically of Master James Cook, though gripped by deep emotion, aware of what he has lost, the debt he owes to a fine man now gone, his words as expressed in his journal are muted. At 6, buried the corpse of Captain John Simcoe, and fired 20 guns, half a minute between each gun. Whatever Cook feels, it is simply not in his nature to give expression to it. In Quebec, the Marquis de Montcalm, the commander of French forces in North America, receives a report from his scouts to the east along the banks of the St. Lawrence. They have heard the rolling boom of the guns piercing the night, saluting Captain Simcoe, and they understand everything only too well. Winter is over. The British have arrived. Merde. In June of 1759, the fleet is 300 miles up the St. Lawrence, the worst of the waters behind them. There remains a single river obstacle, perhaps the greatest they will face, La Traverse. It is a trouble they must take arms against, however, for there is no alternative route. It is imperative that the British soldiers be brought as close to the city of Quebec as possible if they want to take it. Their advance will be far from a solitary affair, backed by the great black guns slumbering aboard the ships. It is simply their only chance, the only avenue of victory against the entrenched French under the Marquis de Montcalm. Admiral Saunders is quick to order the best foremasters from his fleet, James Cook there among them, to sound along the narrows of La Traverse to find a way through. Captain Gordon has already been ordered to take command of 6 ships, which includes the Pembroke, boasting one James Cook, and go ahead of the fleet, marking the way. As the French have sensibly removed all of their own direction buoys, floating empty barrels tethered by cables on the river bed, they must start from scratch. The next day, 8th of June, finds Cook back in one of the Pembroke's boats, standing in the bow with his lead line, as 6 terrified sailors follow his orders to row him back and forth as he sounds the treacherous traverse. The cliffs tower over them, on both sides. Jagged rocks threaten them from below. All while, from the heights, the French cannon rain shot down upon them, with many near misses regularly splashing them. With just one direct hit, they will be killed. But Cook barely blinks and, with a gaze every bit as steady as his hands, continues to mark down his measurements over the next few days, as they return again and again to move back and forth through the traverse. After he has worked out a rough path through the rocks and shoals, they follow it again, testing its suitability. Nothing is left to chance, apart from being killed by a cannonball. No matter. By the 10th of June he is confident that he has accomplished his task, including having gained familiarity with the Traverse's big tidal swings and shallow sandbanks, which really do make it similar to the Thames estuary, and is finally able to record in his log, "Retired satisfied with being acquainted with the channel." His charts are compared with the works of his colleagues, copied, and the resultant charts distributed to the entire fleet. Now aided by several French pilots who know the Traverse waters, who have been captured and now must navigate for their lives to be spared, the British ships slowly move up the river and through the Traverse, aided immeasurably by their small boats who position themselves right by the most difficult spots, to help guide them through. James Cook is of course among them, and is proud to help the Pembroke make it through, just as all the other ships are able to get through to the other side. By the 27th of June, 100 warships of the Royal Navy are through to the other side, with not a single one lost, a triumph of navigation due in no small part to the genius and courage of one Master James Cook. The achievement is deeply appreciated, not just by the Navy brass, but also by the Army's soldiers too, as they are now able to safely disembark onto land, Ile d'Orléans, a large island that lies 5 miles downriver from Quebec. With the ships in place and the troops safely encamped for the moment, all that remains is to find the right landing place as close to Quebec as possible to launch the assault on the city. As leaders of the grandest Royal Navy Army landing operation in British history, Admiral Saunders and General Wolfe are insistent that nothing be left to chance. And so, the masters of the fleet's ships, Cook among them, are ordered to their boats the next day, this time to observe and chart the waters and shoreline upriver from the Traverse, which is all new to them. The French, meanwhile, have a plan of their own. Chapter 2. A Battle Royal.
I beg leave to inform their lordships that, from my experience of Mr. Cook's genius and capacity, I think him well qualified for the work he has performed, and for greater undertakings of the same kind.
Admiral Colville, Commodore and Commander-in-Chief of His Majesty's ships and vessels in North America, in a letter to the Secretary of the Admiralty, December 1762.
Every blockhead does that. My grand tour shall be one round the whole globe.
Joseph Banks, at the age of 21, after being advised by a friend to take the traditional grand tour of Europe. Midnight, 27th of June, 1759. Basson de Quebec. Floating fire ahoy. It is the silent watch of the night, with the only noise being the gentle lapping of the waves against the hulls of the British ships, the murmurs of the men on watch, and suddenly a cry of alarm rings out, carrying far across the water and arousing the attention of all the watchers, and another, and another. Within moments there is uproar as fearful screams carry across the dark waters.
"Fire ships!"
Among those soon rushing up on deck across all the ships is James Cook, who pushes his way to the Pembroke's upper deck to join a jostling group of sailors crowding the gunwale.
"Fire ships!"
Coming at them on the current from upriver are several roaring balls of flame, a tactic perfected by Sir Francis Drake against the Spanish Armada at the Battle of Gravelines in 1588. Small unmanned ships filled with raging combustibles to cause chaos among an anchored enemy fleet. By the hurried count of Master Cook, there are 7 big fire ships and 3 smaller fire rafts. It is going to take quick action to avoid catastrophe, and the master is the man for the job.
"Lower the boats! Sailors, man the boats! Take grappling irons, now! Move! Row!"
The men are unsure what the master has in mind, but trust his judgment and spring into action. For his part, Cook looks across the inky expanse. Silhouetted against the glow from the approaching fires are dozens of British sailors bustling around the upper decks of the 2 ships closest to the approaching fire ships. The crew scramble to find anything with a sharp edge, a cutlass, a saw, a knife, even a piece of broken bottle, and start cutting, chopping, and hacking at these snaking hemp fibres that bind their ships to the anchors in the deep. Hemp makes way for sharpened steel with each blow. The top of the cables fall limply to water below, and just before the fire ships, now roaring infernos, drift onto them, the British ships are hauled away by their own sailors, pulling them to safety in their own small boats. In the meantime, James Cook has now descended into the Pembroke's yawl and taken command of the plan to get the fire ships under control. With nerves of iron, Cook has the yawl brought as close as they dare to one of the fire ships, just as several other boats from the fleet go after the others, and together they manage to throw their grappling hooks upon this floating menace, and together they successfully tow all of the fire ships and flaming rafts well clear of the British Armada. It is the first of many ruses that the desperate French will try over the next weeks as the 2 great powers engage in this arm wrestle for the ages for the city of Quebec. Late one afternoon, James Cook is once more out in the yawl, this time reconnoitring a prospective landing place, When, alerted by the sound of splashing, Cook and his men look up to see dozens of canoes filled with North American Indians and French soldiers. The two have formed a curious alliance, furiously paddling towards them. "Row!" Cook orders, with uncharacteristic sharpness. Like mad things, his men do exactly that, and though it is a close-run thing, they are, in extremis, able to make it to Ile d'Orléans and the fortified British camp. "Quickly, men! On to shore!" So closely do the Abnaki Indians follow that while the British sailors are jumping with Cook from the bow of the yawl, the natives are boarding her at the stern, and Cook and his men are only saved by several armed British soldiers who have been attracted by the commotion and charge into the fray. Among other things, his survival means that James Cook can continue his survey work with Lieutenant Holland, charting the area upriver from La Traverse, and by the middle of August, the latter is ready to hand over to General Wolfe a plan of the River St. Lawrence from the falls of Montmorency to Sillery. Wolfe is so impressed that Holland is immediately promoted to the rank of captain. Indeed, Holland's chart is the key that may unlock the door to Quebec and to the war. Militarily, the value of having accurate maps is about to be tested. The French have no doubt where the British will land. The obvious spot, the notably accessible beach at Beauport, just a few miles north of Quebec, where they send their troops accordingly. The heavy French presence notwithstanding, General Wolfe insists the attack go ahead, right there, and betraying his lack of knowledge when it comes to landings, has them attack at low tide, meaning the boats cannot get closer than 200 yards to the beach. The equipment-laden soldiers must struggle through shallows and mud, making them sitting ducks for the French to hunt from the shore, only a little less mobile. The landing fails with the tragic loss of 450 men. Quebec will have to be captured some other way, but where and how? 12th of September, 1759. Quebec. A fight for the fate of empire. Is this the breakthrough they've been looking for? On a reconnaissance expedition a short way upriver, just a mile or two southwest of Quebec, General Wolfe spots what he's been looking for, a possible weakness in the French defences. It is a small cove on the west side, which appears to have only a skeleton crew of soldiers manning its posts, as the French prefer to concentrate their troops to the north of the city, at Beauport. Even better, as he gazes intently through his telescope, it seems that there is a defined path with a gentle slope to get up the cliffs to the Plains of Abraham above. The key will be to launch an attack there, while convincing the French that the British truly intend to attack again at Beauport, with much of the latter responsibility falling to perhaps the most reliable officer Wolfe has, James Cook. And so it is. On the night of the 12th of September, the dark figure at the bow of the Pembroke's boat, being gently stroked forward, is none other than Cook, as his men lay out buoys in a line to the Beauport shore. Behind him, many other ships' boats are also in line. Cook returns, mission accomplished, to record in his log: moderate and cloudy weather at 6 p.m. Unmoored and hoved in to half a cable on the best bower anchor. At midnight all the rowboats in the fleet made a feint to land at Beauport, in order to draw the enemy's attention that way to favour the landing of the troops above the town. Speaking of which, at exactly the same time, General Wolfe himself leads an imposing 4,400 of his troops to the reconnoitred shore, and, after a minimal struggle against what little French resistance there is, has them climbing to the Plains of Abraham in the darkness, and in position by sunrise. Of course, it does not take the French long to realize they have been duped, and by mid-morning, no fewer than 4,000 gaily uniformed French troops, their felt tricorn hats trimmed with gold lace and trailing a white ribbon cockade that wafts around their blue waistcoats, are marching from the walled city in glorious formation towards the invaders. The two sides quickly get to grips, hand to hand, sword to sword, and even general to general, as both Wolfe and Montcalm are in the thick of it throughout. Alas, though Wolfe's troops gradually get on top, the British general himself takes a mortal blow. The officer closest to him is none other than Captain Samuel Holland, who stoops down to talk to his commander as a soldier near Wolfe shouts, "They run! See how they run!" Wolfe opens his eyes and asks who is running. Assured that it is the French, he just manages to get out his last words. "Now, God be praised, I will die in peace." 5 days later, in the absence of General Montcalm, who has also been killed, France surrenders Quebec to the British. This feat of arms, which has fundamentally decided that North America will be British, not French, becomes a textbook example of how His Majesty's Navy and Army can work together in perfect harmony. And it's all because they were informed by precise charts of both land and sea, put together by Captain Holland, who was assisted by an unknown Navy master. Who was it again? This fellow, James Cook. His efforts have not gone unnoticed, and a fortnight later this rising star of the Royal Navy receives word that he has been promoted to be master of the squadron's flagship, Northumberland, under command of Captain Lord Colville. A further success comes in November, when James Cook's very own Gaspé Bay and harbour is published by the Admiralty among Holland's charts of the area. And there, underneath, is his name, James Cook, master of His Majesty's ship the Pembroke. It appears that in a final act of goodwill, mentoring and promoting the virtues of his charge before his death, Captain Simcoe had sent Cook's master's chart to the Admiralty. Its obvious value to the Admiralty and Great Britain makes Cook even more determined to develop his drafting and navigational skills. He now wants nothing less than to be able to ply his map-making craft in every part of the globe in which he finds himself, and to place those maps at the service of the Admiralty. Nor are the commercial implications being ignored by the British. Maps like the ones Cook draws, precise and with particular attention to shoals, reefs, rivers, headlands, harbours and bays, drawn from the perspective of one to whom such things are crucial, are important to every merchant mariner in the world, as they will help prevent precious cargo ships from running aground. In fact, so new is the art that the copyright for each map is held by the mapmaker, meaning a pretty penny can be guaranteed to the man who makes maps that can be relied upon. James Cook is determined that he will be such a man. No matter that he has made the maps while serving in the Royal Navy, the copyright remains his. So lucrative are his royalties that he could possibly earn a greater annual income simply by providing definitive maps than an admiral would get in salary. Yes, he is so good and so rare in the ranks that his services are placed at a very high premium. Another long, cold winter in Halifax to endure, and things follow the familiar pattern. Most of the Northumberland sailors busy themselves drinking and wenching, interspersed with a little wenching and drinking, all while honey James Cook throws himself into his studies. Again he buries himself in the work of Euclid, the father of geometry, and also delves ever deeper into the science of astronomy and how it can be applied to navigation. In London, meanwhile, the chart of the Gulf of St. Lawrence that he has worked on is being reproduced by the Admiralty, and though Cook's name is absent, what counts is that it is known in Navy circles that he had a large part in it. It means that upon their return to Halifax, he and Captain Holland are put to work, charting further up the St. Lawrence River towards Quebec City, and the results are so impressive that Captain Lord Colville gives an order for his master James Cook to be paid a bonus of £50, in consideration of his indefatigable industry in making himself master of the pilotage of the River St. Lawrence. All of which is good news for Master Cook. The bad news is that the men he commands are suffering ever more from ill health, mostly the ailments that come with the cold, together with malnourishment from living on Navy rations, and are becoming ever more ill-disciplined, engaging in swearing, rudeness, and laxness when on duty. Master Cook tries to tackle both, and when it comes to scurvy, starts to form the idea that it comes from lack of sufficient fresh food. Obviously, there is something that the men usually eat on land that they are not eating at sea. It is just that no one can work out what it is. Groping for an answer, Cook insists his men eat whatever fresh food they can get their hands on. A bit of a problem when the Halifax winter sets in, but Cook's zeal is enough to defeat and eat the coldest quarry and find any greenery buried beneath the snowy scenery. As for the ill discipline, the traditional method of dealing with that in the Royal Navy is to hand out extra lashings of the lash, soaked in salt water, and turn the backs of recalcitrant men into bloody ribbons until they decide to behave. But this does not come easily to Cook, who is humane by nature. Rather, though he has the lash administered when necessary, he prefers to talk to the men and set an example that they can follow. Constant, disciplined work. Ultimately, follow they do. Over time, the men see that Master Cook is different, not a class or two above them, but almost one of them. A solid, stolid, and fair leader of men. They come to not only like him, but respect him, and with that, the problems of ill discipline start to fade. What is also fading is France's military capacity in this part of the world, as it has been relentlessly ground down by the might of Britain over the last 7 years, and the forces of Great Britain can soon lay claim to all of Canada, Nova Scotia, Cape Breton, Florida, Senegal, St. Vincent, Tobago, Dominica, and Grenada, as battles in the North American theatre draw to a close and the war looks set to end. In October 1762, the Northumberland is ordered home. On arrival at Wapping, James Cook walks tall down the gangplank, and though he doesn't strut, as it is not in his nature, he has every right to. When he had left here almost 5 years earlier, he had been little more than a modest master of some skill, but he now returns as a master of surveying and chart-making. What is more, now discharged from his long term of duty, he has a handsome sum of money saved in his pocket, £291, 19 shillings and threepence, a substantial sum when judged against his father's wage of 2 shillings a day. Speaking of whom, it is time for James Cook to visit his parents in their humble cottage in Great Ayton, Yorkshire, and they are incredulous and proud to see their strapping 33-year-old son, no less than a master in the Royal Navy, walk through their front door to their warm embrace. Certainly Cook's father must struggle to understand his son's consuming interest in a Greek mathematician from 300 BC. But James has little time to explain to his dear father, when even a simple explanation of the intricacies of Euclid are beyond that good man's education, if not his natural intellect. Besides which, with typical commitment, James now wishes to start a family of his own, if he can only find a suitable wife back in the city. Yes, if only he can meet the right woman, one with high morals, strong character, and wholesome ambitions, just like him. And if all goes well, he'll not tarry to marry. Wonderfully, it doesn't take long. Her name is Elizabeth Batts, and while he is renting lodgings in the port town of Stepney, just 2 miles east of central London, he meets, in an alehouse, this decent, plump Englishwoman, as no less than James Boswell will describe her, the very woman who the famous diarist and biographer will describe as a good match for Cook, a grave, steady man. Yes, though all of 13 years younger than him, at 20, Miss Batts is just his speed, and with just the right jib. Reliable, steady, solidly middle class. She is very close to the human equivalent of a Whitby cat, though without the thick waist and snub nose. She lives in the parish of Barking in Essex, and is visiting her mother and stepfather at their inn, the Bell Ale House in Wapping. This meeting with James Cook by mere chance makes it feel like fate or even divine providence that they are just meant to be together, for she is smitten from the first with this warrant officer of the Royal Navy. Indeed, there seems to be a magnetic force that continues to pull them together. They are content when together, and pining when apart. Not ideal for a sailor in love, but there it is. James Cook, the man of action, moves fast. He would like to make this black-eyed beauty with a shy smile and pleasing carriage an offer. They do not have time for the traditional posting of the banns, the notice of intent to marry, for Cook's intent is to marry now, with haste, not hesitation. But you can see them there on this beautiful sun-dappled day of the 21st of December, 1762. They are the couple walking deliriously happily hand in hand through the green meadows of Barking on their way to the parish church of St. Margaret's, where Vicar George Downing and a hastily assembled handful of guests, including Elizabeth's mother, await. Not for James Cook and his bride, Elizabeth Batts, the horse and carriage, not for them the finery and the big reception. All they want is each other. When the groom, shortly afterwards, tells his own parents, James and Grace Cook, together with his two sisters, Christiana and Margaret, they are surprised but not shocked. That is so like James. He's not a man for fuss, and will go a long way out of his way to avoid it. And of course, beyond his mathematics and astronomy studies and quick courting of fair Elizabeth, his map-making continues, returning to Newfoundland just under 6 months after being married. And he is so aware of how important it is that his maps can be relied on that he even feels obliged to alert any reader, most particularly any future captain, of any of the few weaknesses that might be found within them. And so he compiles all his survey work of the St. Lawrence River and parts of the coasts of Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, all his drafts and observations, and sends them to the Admiralty. One of his maps of Quebec carries a precise cautionary wording, which soon becomes a Cook hallmark. That part of this plan, between the Pilgrims and Green Island, is not so correct as I could wish, as I had not the time to make sufficient observation there myself. I have been obliged to collect those of others. With respect to the middle bank, which is the only danger in this passage, I find no person I have yet conversed with to have any true idea either of its form or extent. I thought it proper to make the above remarks in order to point out what may be doubtful in this chart. Careful, cautious, honest to a fault, not that he has many, as precise as a Swiss watch. These are the hallmarks of both James Cook and his maritime charts. And it is coming from a mere master, not a captain. It is noticed. So stunning is Cook's output that his captain from the Northumberland, the newly promoted Admiral Lord Colville, on the 30th of December 1762, decides to compliment and complement Cook's valuable opus by writing a missive to my lords of the Admiralty about this extraordinary young man in their ranks. I beg leave to inform their lordships that from my experience of Mr. Cook's genius and capacity, I think him well qualified for the work he has performed, and for greater undertakings of the same kind. A genius, with extraordinary capacity. Said of a nigh-nameless sailor, a regular jack originating from the lower orders? Admiral Colville goes on. These drafts being made under my own eye, I can venture to say they may be the means of directing many in the right way, but cannot mislead any. It is perilously close to un-British to record such glowing views about one who is not a gentleman born. But these are changing times, heady times, and James Cook finds himself working in an area that is on the cusp of major change. More and more, it is understood by the admirals, thanks in large part to the insistence of Admiral George Anson, that good navigation could not only mean the difference between life and death for hundreds of your sailors at a time, but also death for thousands of your enemy. It means that those like James Cook, who can master this esoteric art, must be promoted, even if they have no personal resources, have not been to a famous school, and still speak with the mashed and bashed vowels of a Yorkshireman, one of the richest accents of some of the poorest people in England. It is relatively straightforward, thus, that when Captain Thomas Graves, the British governor of the newly won territory of Newfoundland and Labrador, is instructed by my lords of the Admiralty to prepare and communicate drafts of coasts and harbours, his first port of call is none other than the impressive Master James Cook, who he had met during the 7 Years' War, and who is now back in London. To give the job to another would be absurd. The Admiralty clearly feels the same way, for their approval is swift, and so it is that in April 1763 Cook bids his newly pregnant wife, fair Elizabeth, a sad farewell, and heads off across the Atlantic once more. His most important task is to map the coastline and waters of Newfoundland, England's oldest colony, claimed for England and King Henry VII in 1497 by John Cabot, an island bigger than Ireland. The task is as exacting as it is exhausting, as it is profitable. In recognition of his all but unique skill in the field, Cook is granted the handsome stipend of 10 shillings a day, and, unlike the limited missions of a naval captain, with a commission that is as limitless as his ambition. In short order, Captain Graves takes the crucial step of purchasing a separate vessel, the Grenville, that can be exclusively devoted to surveying, with plans to place in command none other than Master James Cook. After his first season in Newfoundland, Cook leaves the Grenville and heads back to London with a note from Captain Graves to the Admiralty saying the necessary charting for the season has been completed with indefatigable industry by the talented Cook. As Mr. Cook, whose pains and attention are beyond my description, can go no further in surveying this year, I send him home in the Tweed in preference to keeping him on board, that he may have the more time to finish the difficult surveys already taken. On arrival at Spithead, Cook takes a carriage straight home to Shadwell in London, to his dear Elizabeth and his new baby boy just 7 weeks old. They baptise him James. That winter, James Cook Sr., if you please, every morning bids his wife and son fond farewell to take the horse bus from their newly purchased home by a reeking distillery on Mile End Road, some 5 miles to the Admiralty at Westminster, where he is ever and always absorbed until late in the evening, drawing fair copies of his charts. Unsurprisingly, it does not take long before his presence becomes known to the likes of Admiralty Secretary Philip Stevens. For have you seen these charts? Done by a fellow the name of James Cook, a mere master. We must give him extra scope. As comfortable and rewarding as his current circumstances are, Cook wants more than simply to be England's greatest mapmaker, living happily ever after on a handsome stipend. For rather than mapping what has already been discovered by others in known parts of the globe, rather than being at best the dutiful master to an upper-class commander, he wants to be a genuine captain himself, and take his ship to parts of the globe where there is no map, where he could be both the discoverer of new lands and the first one to map them. None of which Cook broadcasts to superiors or colleagues, friends or family. A modest man who is reserved to the point of appearing enigmatic and entirely closed off, he engages in little needless conversation. A humble visionary surrounded substantially by toffs, an enthusiast for the modern. In the midst of purveyors of high tradition and passing the port to the left, it makes sense to keep himself to himself, to not make too much noise. And in any case that is precisely the way of the Quakers, whose culture he had been immersed in during his teenage years. Only to fair Elizabeth Batts does he reveal his true self, which, to be fair, is just a little up from the ultra-modest facade he shows the world. And usually only with her and for her does he show that impulsive side of his nature. 13th of February, 1764. London, Banks robbery. Off into the wild night they go. For Joseph Banks and his many dandy friends, London is their oyster tonight of all nights, for on this day just gone Joseph has inherited his late father's considerable fortune. My good man, take us to the Athenian Club, and be on standby, for after that we will likely go to Piccadilly, and after that who knows? A small fortune is spent this night on amusing Banks and his friends, not to mention the many women they meet. But what does it matter? 3 years earlier, his father William had died, leaving his vast inheritance encompassing sprawling estates in Lincolnshire, Staffordshire, Derbyshire and Sussex, yielding a most impressive £6,000 a year income, to his only son and heir, Joseph, held in trust until now, his 21st birthday. "Waiter, more cognac for my friends. Eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow I botanize." For yes, from early adulthood onwards, Joseph had been studying at Oxford, where, beyond being as unfocused as ever on studying the classic staples of Greek and Latin, he has been able to indulge more than ever his fascination with studying the natural world. Occasionally, Banks's passion has caused problems, to the amusement of his friends. On one occasion, when a gentleman in a post-chaise had been robbed by a highwayman out Hounslow way, the aggrieved man and his driver set out in hot pursuit on their horses alone, when sure enough they saw what they took to be the highwayman trying to hide under a hedge. "Here he is," cried the driver, before they dragged him out from under the hedge by his ankles. It was in vain for Joseph Banks to protest that he was not a highwayman, that he was but a gentleman out botanizing, looking for new plants, for they dragged him to Bow Street Magistrates' Court and charged him with robbery before the famed magistrate Sir John Fielding. Of course, it is all sorted out eventually, and apologies presented, but no one blames the gentleman in the post-chaise for the mistake. It is unbelievable that a real gentleman should be on his knees with his head under a hedge. Anyone could have made such a mistake. Banks doesn't care. Passionate for the natural world since he has been knee-high to a grasshopper, or, as he knows it, to a species of Acrodomorpha, he is so obsessed with his passion he either wants to be engaging in it or at least learning about it, and is soon doing exactly that at the great seat of learning, Oxford. True, it is a small problem that Oxford has no botanist who could be classified as a leader in his field, but what cares a man like Banks? For the abundant wealth he now boasts comes complete with its own set of silky keys, capable of opening practically every door. To keep with his standard of only getting the best of la crème de la crème de la crème, the enterprising young Banks simply pops over to Cambridge and arranges for its leading botanical expert, one Israel Lyons, to come over to Oxford and give him private tutorials, all paid for out of his own pocket, which is as deep as it is elegant. Problem solved. Indeed, the way Joseph treats Oxford is less like the bastion of classical book learning that it is, and more like one of Whitby's apprentice schools, working often with his bare hands on the craft of natural history, botanical, animal, and mineral, just as James Cook had been taught the craft of sailing, and all things sea life. It is a happy circumstance for both men that they are entering their fields of endeavour at the time that both fields are taking great leaps forward in their capacity to make sense of the world. For yes, even as the science of maritime navigation is, finding its way, so too is the study of botany blooming. Each man positions himself at the forefront of the expanding frontier and will be swept along by it. In the case of Banks and botany, it is clear where the frontier lies, always with the latest work and theories of the leading botanist of Europe, the great Swedish naturalist Carl Linnaeus. He is no less than the father of taxonomy, the man who wrote the book in 1735, the first and last word on the subject, Systema Naturae, and whose system of identifying, naming, and classifying organisms is quickly becoming universally accepted among men of science. For, you see, the entire natural world can be broken down into three basic kingdoms: animal, vegetable, and mineral. They in turn are divided into classes, which can in turn be divided into orders, genera, and species. Not for nothing would the Swede frequently say of himself, in the Latin language of science, Deus creavit, Linnaeus disposuit. God created, and Linnaeus organized. The greatest breakthrough of Linnaeus is to institute his two-name naming system, whereby the first name identifies the genus, while the second name identifies the species of organism within a kingdom. Humans, for example, belong to the genus Homo, and within this genus to the species Homo sapiens. The same system could be applied to plants, including the countless plants that remain unknown to Europeans. And as he is the first to use the system, Carl Linnaeus simply gives the groups the names of his friends and esteemed colleagues. The genus of the flower known as Gardenia, for example, is named after the Scottish-born naturalist Dr. Alexander Garden, while the magnolia and dahlia are named for French botanist Pierre Magnol and the Swedish botanist Anders Dahl. It is a system which quickly takes hold, and as a system of classification, is in its golden dawn.
This ends CD 2. CD 3.
It means there is a great deal to do. Linnaeus would himself name and catalogue an extraordinary 5,600 plant specimens, as his disciples spread. True, for Banks, it is slightly problematic that the great Swedish botanist writes in Latin, a language which Banks has never ceased all but ignoring, picking up only enough to just get by. But now that he sees that understanding Latin can be useful in learning about botany, he suddenly gets very interested indeed. After all, botany is such a joy. Never once since that day bouncing down the lane where he had seen the old woman with the herbs has his passion waned, and if anything, it has only increased. For beyond wanting to know about every flower, shrub, and tree in Britain, he now wonders what plants and animals are out there on this vast globe, as yet undiscovered. Perhaps there might be species out there even beyond imagination. Of course, the tried and true Oxonians among his peers look askance at these strange, unscholarly, earthy enterprises of Banks and do not bother to hide their distaste for anything of this nature that involves getting your hands dirty in nature. Banks knows that attitude well. As a matter of fact, early on in his days at Oxford, he had wandered by happenstance into one of the old reading rooms, all rich mahogany, pompous portraits of wigged men with academic poise, and thousands of books, where his fellow Oxonians were earnestly discussing an ancient text when, as soon as he was spotted, one of them looked up and let out a ready remark. "Here is Banks, but he knows nothing of Greek." It was their way of saying, yes, Banks may be a popular enough fellow, but he is not to be taken seriously. For he is no more steeped in the ancient languages than he is in the ancient texts. Banks took it in good humour, just as he does when he hears the same remark several times afterwards, but quietly vows to himself, "I shall very soon beat you all in a kind of knowledge I think infinitely more important. For you can have your ancient language and ancient texts. I wish to make my mark in modern knowledge, do my bit in adding to it, and make my name in doing so." For all that, even Banks's most fierce critics have no doubt about his abilities in this new field of natural history, and whenever questions do arise among these classical men about this field, the first response is always the same: we must go to Banks. And he is always found in the same place, somewhere out on the grounds, botanizing. Banks is always happy to help, though always on the grounds of adding to knowledge rather than helping them with their marks. He cares as little for their marks as he does his own. For many of his peers, the dream is to spend time after university doing a grand tour of continental Europe and travelling the Mediterranean. But when they suggest such a trip to Banks, they get a curt reply. Every blockhead does that. My grand tour shall be one round the whole globe. And yet, even a global gallant gallivanter must have a firm base, and so he buys a 3-story with a garret and basement for the servants' terrace house on London's New Burlington Street, a particularly fashionable part of the burgeoning metropolis called Mayfair. So modern are these houses, so fashionable is this part of the world, that New Burlington Street is the first in all of London to be numbered, with Banks living at number 14. Joseph Banks also remains close to his widowed mother and his dear sister Sarah, both now living happily in Turret House on Chelsea's Paradise Row. For years now he has loved going to visit, not just because of the pleasure of seeing them, but also because of the house's happy position, right next to the Society of Apothecaries Physic Garden, where herbs are grown and seed collected for use as medicines, which happens to be overseen by a very well-credentialed botanist by the name of Philip Miller, whose impressive personal resume includes being a close friend of the legendary Carl Linnaeus. Oh, the happy hours, days, weeks young Joseph spends in those gardens, talking to Miller and his offsiders, digging, clipping, harvesting, soaking up knowledge as he goes. And although power and influence can also be found in this part of the world, in no one are they found in such abundance as in the person of the long-time Banks family friend, that debonair dasher of a man, John Montague, no less than the 4th Earl of Sandwich. Like Joseph Banks, the Earl is an old Etonian, in his case 25 years older than Banks, but he takes quite a shine to the young man anyway, taking him under his wing and introducing him to the key people in Britain's upper echelons he knows well, which is very nearly everyone. As a man who has already twice served as First Lord of the Admiralty, the key politically appointed naval adviser to the Prime Minister, he is now in the British Cabinet as a Secretary of State. Beyond such important posts, however, Lord Sandwich has also been an active Fellow of the powerful Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge, that most august British institution popularly known as the Royal Society, which means he is fully briefed at all times on just where the frontiers of knowledge lie in a dozen fields at once, including botany, and Banks delights being in his company and those of his fellows. As Lord Sandwich is also something of an amateur botanist, the two often go on long, rambling walks through the fens of Lincolnshire and elsewhere across England and Wales, collecting samples, fishing in the Thames and the Serpentine, Hyde Park's lake, all while trading gossip and knowledge. Helping to bind the two even further, despite the disparity in age, is a shared hedonistic streak, whereby they delight in angling for other fine specimens most highly prized by men of their ilk, beautiful women. Certainly Lord Sandwich is married, but in the first place that had never slowed him down, as he had already been openly celebrated for taking the famous beauty and courtesan mentioned in Casanova's memoirs, the celebrated Miss Fanny Murray, as his mistress, and open enough about it that he famously displayed a portrait of her, nude, in his London lodgings. And in the second place, it is well known that Lord Sandwich's wife had long before descended into insanity. At the moment, Sandwich has moved on from Fanny Murray to a talented and gorgeous 17-year-old singer, Martha Ray, 28 years his junior, for whom he even finds a room in his lodgings. Word of his sexual proclivities get around, and one oft-repeated anecdote among London's social set, celebrated ever afterwards, is an exchange Lord Sandwich had with the actor Samuel Foote. "Foote," Sandwich is said to have declared in jest, "I have often wondered what catastrophe would bring you to your end. But I think that you must either die of the pox or the noose." "My lord," replied Foote magnificently, "that will depend upon one of two contingencies, whether I embrace your lordship's mistress or your lordship's principles." One of those principles is that sundown is not the signal for the end of the day's activities, but merely that things are about to warm up, and one of Sandwich's keenest nocturnal pursuits, beyond the obvious, is playing cards, betting big early and staying late, playing Lantaloo, Pope Joan, and Ombre, among others, and he is usually so engrossed that he refuses to take pause for meals, instead ordering his servant to simply place his salted beef between two slices of bread. Soon his gambling, grumbling acquaintances are habitually calling for the same as Sandwich, as they try to stay with him in the gambling stakes. Few attempt to compete with Sandwich when it comes to bedding women, but Joseph Banks is at least an intent student of the art, and a good starting point proves to be showing women his grand home. Against that, as magnificent and large as that home is, after Banks makes tours of England and Wales for weeks at a time, returning with an ever-fresh collection of specimens, both flora and fauna, the house is soon groaning under the weight of them all, as every tabletop and unused room is filled up, giving it the appearance of a natural history museum. Fortunately, the women don't seem to mind much, and nor does Banks's growing coterie of eminent friends, men of influence and women of grace, most introduced to him by, "Waiter, more bread and meat, Lord Sandwich." Joseph Banks follows even more in the Lord's glorious wake, launching himself on the capital of the British Empire, quickly becoming a ubiquitous man about town, the centre of attention, the man with the best stories, the most beautiful women, and the biggest bar bill. A reserved, self-contained man, James Cook does not make friends easily. Never garrulous by nature, since the time he became serious about learning all there was to learn about navigation, he has always preferred his studies to the tavern, his work to social occasions. Beyond that, his rapid rise through the ranks, despite not being well-born, has meant that he has left behind all those with whom he grew up, all those he first served on ships with. And among those fellow commanders he now mixes with, he is perpetually an outsider, not of their class, their background, their world. He is a man born to be before the mast, who has somehow made his way aft of the mast, and not only do some of them resent the rapidity of his promotion, but also the persistence, for he keeps vaulting higher. James Cook does not care particularly. It is his happy circumstance that his dear wife, Elizabeth, is also his cherished friend, his closest confidant, and the person with whom he most wishes to spend time. It means that, while his ambitions to conquer the world only grow, the one he wants at home is a very small one, not much more than Elizabeth and whatever children they might be blessed to have, all in their home on Mile End Road. And she feels the same. And yet, as will ever happen in their life together, however happy Cook is at home, the coming of spring, 1764, brings the call of the sea, where he continues to prosper. By the middle of April 1764, superb with handling the men and the ship, and his mapping coming along at pace, he has been appointed by the Admiralty to command the Grenville, from spring to autumn each year, travelling across the Atlantic from London to continue his methodical surveying work until it is complete. He sets off once more to Newfoundland, excited to get there and see his old captain and patron, Sir Hugh Palliser, who is the newly appointed governor of Newfoundland. Elizabeth, pregnant with their second child, farewells him and frets until his blessed return. Every time he departs, Elizabeth is fearful that he will be hurt or drowned, and those fears are not unfounded, for on the 6th of August 1764, James Cook is on the northern shore of Newfoundland, out hunting for animals and birds, reloading his musket after a missed shot when it happens. He is just about to pour the powder from his horn, literally the horn of an ox that is used to hold gunpowder, into the pan, when a spark near the torch hole ignites the powder. Boom! Unfortunately for James Cook, the explosion shreds his right hand in a split second. The entry in the Grenville's log that afternoon will be written, not surprisingly, by another. 2 p.m. Came on board the cutter with the master, who unfortunately had a large powder horn blown up and burst in his hand, which shattered it in a terrible manner, and one of the people that stood hard by suffered greatly by the same accident. As the Grenville has no surgeon on board, a French doctor on a nearby fishing vessel is sent for, and must work vigorously to save the hand, most particularly suturing the massive rip that extends from between Cook's thumb and forefinger across the palm and right around to his wrist. It will leave him with a massive and angry red wheal of scar, and such a sensitivity to it that for the rest of his life his right hand will, more often than not, be either gloved or firmly planted in his right pocket. Others might say they can read the future by gazing in the palm of their hands, but James Cook wishes to hide his past by covering that hideous scar. In any case, Elizabeth is at pains to assure him, as soon as he returns to her own unblemished arms, it's no matter to her whatsoever, and that is all that truly counts. He forgets the bulging scar, at least momentarily, when he returns home that winter in his own vessel, the Grenville, and holds his second beautiful baby boy, Nathaniel, in his arms. Such a time of familial joy is tempered, however, when his mother, Grace, dies in the family cottage on Bridge Street, Great Ayton, at the age of 63, just before he must head off on his third season in 1765. Of course, he makes one of his infrequent returns to his childhood home for the funeral, and while there returns briefly to his old stamping ground at Whitby, and the word soon spreads to the likes of the Walkers, Mr. Sanderson, his old captains, the old fishermen, the sailors, and those still in the taverns, all these years on. They have aged, and no doubt about it, but look at him. He has filled out, grown beyond 6 feet, beyond Whitby. And a master in the Royal Navy now, young James. Well, come and share a pint, as in days of old. Whitby is proud of him, and James Cook would be inclined to stay longer, but, as ever, he must away to the trumpet's blast from the Admiralty, which he has been heeding for more than a decade. In late July 1766, while commanding the Grenville, Master Cook is doing what he does best when he finds himself in fog so thick that pea soup would be envious, all on an unnamed and uncharted island of the Burgeo Islands, just off the southwest coast of Newfoundland. After the 13th morning, on the 5th of August, the fog at last clears, and the sun shines through. But what is this? Before Cook's very eyes, just as he had been hoping, an eclipse starts. Cook instantly brings his brass telescopic quadrant to bear, to scientifically observe what is occurring. Typically, James Cook had not just studied Charles Leadbetter's astronomy text given to him by Captain Simcoe and left it at that. No, after coming to realize the virtues of eclipses in solving riddles for mariners, he had followed astronomical events closely since, had always known what was about to occur in the heavens, and done many observations to hone his skills and practice his calculations. This latest event is not manna from heaven, it is his due. Accordingly, looking through his brass telescope quadrant, just a minute after a part of the sun starts to be eaten by a small black ball, he notes the time of the beginning and the end, and then, comparing it with the times of the eclipse at other known meridians, most particularly the one in Greenwich, he has to consult his books. He calculates his own precise local longitude. He goes back to his cabin to make his calculations, and, after writing up several pages of his notes, he prepares to send them to a learned acquaintance back in London, Dr. John Bevis. Thereafter, Master Cook in Newfoundland completes his survey of the previously unnamed island, now marking it down as, Eclipse Island, before moving on to survey the next island along the coast. There's much to do, as ever, in the life of Master James Cook, and he is entirely unaware that the wheels of fate are starting to work in synchronicity, pushing his cause as never before. For when, in London, Dr. Bevis receives James Cook's eclipse observations, he is in turn so taken with them, he presents them as a formal paper, under the name of James Cook, to the Royal Society, that august and enlightened body of gentlemen scientists that embodies the age of enlightenment, hoping to use science to beat back the mystery that still surrounds much of the globe. On the 30th of April, 1767, an observation of an eclipse of the sun at the island of Newfoundland, August the 5th, 1766, by Mr. James Cook, with the longitudes of the place of observation deduced from it. Good Lord! A paper presented and well received at the Royal Society, from the notes of a mere master in the Royal Navy? How could a relatively humble seaman make such observations, and then even make deductions from those observations himself? and he's not a proper astronomer, nor a mathematician of any repute. It is remarkable, unheard of. It has much the same impact as Cook's charts had had on the Admiralty. Who can this fellow James Cook be? Well, Dr. Beavis is only too happy to give the answer, assuring the Society that Mr. Cook is a good mathematician and very expert in his business. The episode provides just one more feather in the cap of one who is gathering at least his fair share. Just how far will Cook go? A long way. Most of his superiors agree, though none remotely approaches the truth of it. Among those impressed by this unique paper by an obscure Navy man over in Newfoundland is none other than the fresh-faced Joseph Banks, who was elected as a member of the highly influential Royal Society just the year before, in 1766. Of course, he attends every meeting he can, apart from those many times when he is away on one of his many natural history expeditions through the wilds of England and Wales, returning to London with his many servants laden down with boxes of freshly pressed plants, newly stuffed birds and mammals that he has just captured and killed to add to his collection. Due to the influence of Sandwich, in 1766 Banks had been afforded the wonderful opportunity to voyage across the Atlantic to Newfoundland and Labrador on HMS Niger, charged with studying the island's natural history, documenting and cataloguing several newly discovered species of animal and vegetable. And though Mr. Banks didn't get to meet this outstanding James Cook fellow that Governor Sir Hugh Palliser kept telling him about, he had brought home a number of fine and exotic plant species, from which he hopes to use as the foundation for the grand herbarium he plans to establish, essentially a storage and display facility for plant specimens. Most importantly, he had brought back splendid memories and a passion even greater than before for going on more adventures. For, oh, what a time he had had, some of the happiest of his life to date, seeing new sights every day, collecting samples and specimens in the outdoors from dawn to dusk, all of it in the company of adventurous, experienced officers. Yes, perhaps other high-born gentlemen would struggle with roughing it in such circumstances, but he had been so caught up in the fun of it all, he had barely noticed any of the trials visited upon them. In the circles he now moves in, and is often dead centre of, he soon hears through his friends in the Royal Society stories about some plans to send a ship to the Pacific to observe the transit of Venus. Now that is the grand tour he has truly been looking for. Most wonderfully, the dear Earl of Sandwich, as a member of the Society and a former First Lord of the Admiralty, knows all about it, and promises to help him get aboard. Banks can think of little else, talk of little else, and one cold night in the winter of late 1767 is in full cry on the subject at the private home of a friend, enjoying another bibulous male dinner party, when the tubby fellow sitting across from him jumps to his feet and declares in a light Nordic accent, "I wish to come too." Banks beams to hear it, for the tubby fellow is no less than the esteemed Swedish naturalist Dr. Solander, the beloved pupil of Carl Linnaeus. Solander has spent most of the last decade in England, bringing English naturalists up to speed on the master's taxonomy. He's been working at the British Museum since 1763, where he spends his days describing and cataloguing all manner of natural specimens, vegetable, animal, and mineral. He is the perfect teacher for Banks, for his polite and agreeable manners, as well as his great knowledge in most departments of natural history. "Come, my good sir, we can botanize in lands unknown. It'll be a lark." 18th of June, 1767. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, the day of the dolphin. Aboard the HMS Dolphin, Captain Samuel Wallace is feeling rather ill. Confined to his cabin, he suffers from a bilious disorder, a sign of the dreaded scurvy. 2 of his senior officers are in the same condition. It had taken 3 months to bring the Dolphin from England west through the Straits of Magellan at the bottom of South America, and another 2 thereafter of sailing in the vast blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean, searching for Terra Australis Incognita, only to find nothing. Not a single speck of land. Until now. A tiny island in the middle of the South Seas. And thank the heavens they need it. Fresh water and food are severely depleted, and the men are beginning to drop like flies. George Robertson, master of the Dolphin, sends word to the captain that the master's mate, John Gore, has had an unsuccessful venture ashore. Yes, he went ashore with a small party in search of fresh food and water, but he and his men were beaten off by natives, fellows none too impressed by the intrusion. There was nothing else to do than fire above their heads before returning to the ship. They will try again. Now they are headed towards peaks on the horizon, not too far to the west. It looks to be a much larger island. They'll try their luck there. 24th of June, 1767. Tahiti, Rue Britannia. Word spreads like fish darting away from a spear. The island the locals called Otaheite is abuzz with the news. Something is coming. Something big, like we have never seen. The warriors, their brown skin marked with intricate black lines, make ready for a fight, sharpening their spears and readying their fastest canoes. Sure enough, the rumours prove true, and it is not long before the giant canoe arrives on the coast, white apparitions billowing in the distance. The islanders crowd the beaches, staring in wonder at this strange visitation, following its course until it approaches Matavai Bay, home to a thriving community in the fertile valleys which rise up to the old volcano's peak. Now the giant canoe slows, and the Maetia witness strange men. Are they men? They look so white. Climb down into smaller canoes of more recognizable mien. Instantly the brave Tahitian warriors are rowing out to meet these intruders, now gathering beneath the Dolphin's enormous hull. They yell out, asking what are they doing? Why are they here? What are their intentions? This isn't your land. They wave plantain branches to signal peaceful intentions. Everything will be fine, as long as these white men leave these shores. Some men have different ideas. Enterprising entrepreneurs, bringing hogs, fowls, and fruit, looking to trade for whatever these ghostly intruders might have brought with them. But the white men can only respond in their own strange tongue, a flowing litany of barking sounds that signify nothing. The language barrier between these disparate peoples will not be an easy one to overcome. Now the white men start to bring their hands to their mouths, making motions of eating and drinking. They begin to crow like chickens and snort like pigs. Do they want our animals? There's confusion all around as yet more canoes arrive, and a full flotilla of Tahitian warriors begin to circle the Dolphin. From one of these native canoes now comes a rock, hurling through the air and landing with a thump in the white men's smaller canoe. The white men yell. More rocks hitting the men in the cutter. As one, the white men pluck something from their sides and brandish them in the air, sticks that amazingly shine in the sun. With a crack fiercer than lightning, one of the sticks lets out fire. Master's mate, John Gore, has thought himself a hunter since he was a boy in his native Virginia, and he really is a good shot. When the rocks start hitting his men, he takes aim at the man in the canoe who had thrown the first stone, and boom, clean shot to the right shoulder. The islander screams in agony. Whatever he expected in return for throwing a stone, it wasn't this. Whatever this hellish trickery is, something has wormed its way into his body and lies there burning. He bleeds. The rest of the natives can't begin to comprehend what has happened either, but they heard the noise and they have seen the blood. They jump, flying overboard and diving deep under the water. But the white men are not done. After fussing about what looks like a tilted, shiny black log, something amazing occurs. A much louder, harsher explosion suddenly bursts forth, followed by a geyser of water behind them, suddenly reaching for the skies. The roar of the water reminds the natives of the largest waves they have ever seen. What have these cursed white men brought to our shores? Row! Flee! Another blast, like Patirioania, thunder, though this time the hellish black ball flies into a canoe holding one of the chiefs. The flimsy wooden craft is no match for a 9-pound iron ball shot from an English cannon, and it turns to splinters before the sound of the explosion has stopped reverberating across the water. The men jump to safety, though within half an hour there is not a canoe to be seen in Matavai Bay. Watching this extraordinary sight from a nearby hilltop is an exiled priest, a charismatic holy man and a proud, strong warrior in his own right, hailing from Raiatea. A high practitioner of the cult of the deity Oro, he has left his own island because it was invaded by warriors from neighbouring Bola Bola. His name is Tupia, and he continues to watch from relative safety as puffs of smoke start emerging from the side of the visitor's ship, followed by dirty balls of thunder rolling over the people, and trees crashing down, and people being blown apart on the beach. Whoever these men are, whatever their magic is, it is clear to Tupia from the first that they are powerful, and, as ever, his instinct is to get closer to this power, to understand it, and perhaps have some of it for himself. All he needs to do is to work out how it might be done. The skirmishes continue for 5 days, with the Tahitians making constant darting attacks that are as quickly beaten off. On the 6th day, the Tahitians launch another flotilla, larger than any the white men have seen before. These islanders have gathered some 4,000 men, each one a fearsome warrior in his own right. A sea of menacing dark faces now surrounds the Dolphin. The tension is palpable as the native men look above to the pale-skinned British sailors on deck. And now, with a guttural cry from one of them, in the grandest canoe of all, suddenly stones begin to fly. It is a precise, concerted attack. They are simple weapons, but they are expertly wielded. Many of the white men duck for cover as the rocks whistle by, though more still are too slow. With blood pouring from wounds to their heads, they fall to the deck and wait for the initial salvo to pass. Now, rising from behind the gunwale of the ship, some of the white men take aim with their long sticks, while others fuss around the shiny black logs. Thunder cracks out over the water. A volley of iron balls, small and large, crashes down upon the ocean, and the men aboard their canoes. It is total carnage, and the ocean foam turns pink with lifeblood among the detritus of shattered canoes and floating bodies. But the white men are not done. Hurl stones at us, will you? Following the fleeing Tahitians back to shore, the white men disembark and begin hacking at the canoes with their strange tools and weapons. Before long, 80 of the Tahitians' finest canoes have been destroyed. The next time the Tahitians dare to approach the big canoe in their bay, they go with plantain branches. And so peace takes hold, as the white men begin to trade with the Tahitians. Beads, trinkets, curios, but most importantly, nails. It is the most prized possession the white men have with them, and the Tahitians will trade anything for them. Indeed, they are so valuable, so priceless, that the first package of them is taken directly to the temple, where they are laid out as an offering to the gods. Some are even planted like seeds. Soon every man in the area is making his way towards this strange ship, bringing with him hogs, chickens, plantains, coconuts, and other fruits, before the Tahitians realize the best trade of all. For you see, if you can believe it, these unusual white fellows have brought no women with them. Shortly thereafter, the native men bring their women along with them, and it is not long before the white men, bellies full and carnal desires satisfied, decide that they have grown madly fond of shore. Things get so out of hand so quickly that ere they had been in Tahiti for a month, The carpenter gravely informs the captain that every cleat in the ship is drawn and all the nails carried off, even as the boatswain informs him that most of the hammock nails are drawn and 2/3 of the men obliged to lie on the deck for want of nails to hang their hammocks. Another month again, and for the men at least, things become grimmer still, when mere small nails can no longer satisfy the desires of the young girls, who raised their price for some of the days past to big nails, and some were so extravagant as to demand a 7 or 9-inch spike. Of course, only a very few sailors are able to meet such requirements. On the 27th of July, 1767, Captain Wallis gives the order to weigh anchor. He is reluctant to do so, as morale is higher than ever, and the crew is as happy and manageable as a crew can be. And yet, even so, they must sail on to the great southern land, or failing that, bring the ship home to England in one piece. Before the wind picks up and the sails billow, Wallis finds the time to claim the land for England, naming it King George III's Island. The men of the Dolphin gather on the stern, each one of them lamenting the loss of the land they leave. It melts away into the distance, a paradise found, a paradise lost. They pray they will return, though it seems terribly unlikely. As they leave, Master George Robertson writes that Tahiti boasts the most beautiful appearance it is possible to imagine. Wait. What? What? How did he do these? It is late 1767, and for the first time those in the higher echelons of the Admiralty have a chance to look at the charts of Newfoundland and Labrador composed by this fellow Master James Cook. And they are stunned. No one has ever seen charts like them. They are minutely detailed, perfectly framed from the point of view of the needs of the mariner, and show everything from the contours of the coast to the positions of reefs and shoals, to the depth of water at every point. And so too, now that they have a closer look at it, is the record of Master Cook as commander of the Grenville these past 5 years. Actually, when you look closer still, his entire record of 20 years at sea is something more than exemplary, nary a mark against his name. Until one day, the 10th of November, 1767. Master James Cook, returning from another summer season of surveying in Newfoundland, has just sailed the Grenville into the Thames estuary and dropped anchor when a tempest descends. So violent is the storm that the Grenville's anchors cannot hold her, and she is thrown into the shoals and lay down on her larboard bilge, only being saved by Cook and his men launching the ship's boats in the shrieking gale and pulling her upright and off. In the course of the tumult, a piece of far-flung foreign cargo comes loose and floats away. It is a native canoe, a present from Governor Palliser of Newfoundland for Cook to present to a Mr. Joseph Banks, whoever that might be, when he returns to London. Ah, well, so close, yet so far. Mr. Cook is about to be back in London in a day or two, but where the canoe is, nobody knows. Up the Thames without a paddle, probably halfway to Essex by now, for some surprised farmer to find. Mr. Banks will have to do without his native novelty, and without meeting Master James Cook. It is no more than a minor episode in Cook's very busy life. His only respite from frenzied activity is when he can finally get home to his dear Elizabeth, falling into her arms after months away, before being presented with another of his children that he has not yet met. Not a boy this time, but a bonny baby girl, named after her mother, and instantly just as beloved by her father. Rocking her lightly, even as his 2 young boys urgently grab at his pant legs, desperate for some attention of their own from their father, who has been so sorely missed. Governor Captain Sir Hugh Palliser, meanwhile, continues his generous patronage from Newfoundland. After the 1767 season, he writes to the Secretary of the Admiralty, praising Cook's work and seeking permission for Cook to publish his charts. I am of the opinion Master Cook's charts will be a great encouragement to new adventures in the fisheries upon these coasts. Be pleased to move their lordships to permit Mr. Cook to publish the same. James Cook is a rising star. Appropriate, really, as the next part of his fate is, if not quite written in the stars, at least manifestly guided by one rising star in particular. Chapter 3. The Rising Star. Nullius in verba, the motto of the Royal Society. It translates to "on the word of no one." Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land, or more hopefully, Nondum Cognita, not yet known but in due course to be revealed. The brief words trail a long history, are aromatic with an old romance, as of great folios in ancient libraries, compassing all philosophical and geographical knowledge, with pages and double pages of maps whose very amplitude and pattern ravish the mind, and they present us with one of the great illusions. J.C. Beaglehole, The Life of Captain James Cook, 1974. Then we ploughed the South Ocean, such land to discover, as amongst other nations has made such a pother. We found it, my boys, and with joy be it told, for beauty such islands you ne'er did behold. We of the pleasure ourselves the tidings did bring, as may welcome us home to our country and king. The Dolphins Return, 1768, a naval song to the tune of The Lilies of France. Early 1768. London, a fate written in the stars. It is the tiniest of cogs in the clockwork of the heavens, but like clockwork it is, if a little complicated. Every 243 years, the transit of Venus occurs 4 times in a known pattern. The transits occur in pairs, spaced roughly 8 years apart. Then the cycle starts again. Viewed from Earth, each transit lasts for around 6 hours. As the closest planet to Earth, Venus moves in front of the Sun, showing up as a small black disk on its mighty face. Prima facie, it is not something to excite any of the sailors in His Majesty's Navy, nor her captains, nor masters, nor even most of the Admiralty. But that is of no account. What counts is that it means a great deal to the learned and powerful men of the Royal Society. For these select men, the shining lights and brightest minds of the entire realm, leading the most venerated and powerful scientific institution in the country, and perhaps the world, boasting all the finest scientists across all the major disciplines, and officially in charge of the Greenwich Observatory, it is their opinion which holds sway, and none more than the Society's well-connected and influential elderly president, the 14th Earl of Morton, Scotsman James Douglas, an astronomer. Most importantly, the men are guided by the astronomically inclined ghost of Sir Edmund Halley. Before absconding from his earthly bonds in 1742, the legendary Astronomer Royal had realized the breakthrough that could be achieved by observing the same event at the same time from widely spaced locations on Earth. These transits would occur in 1761 and 1769, he said, and if they could be properly examined from geographically distinct areas at a precisely known relative time, then the distance from Earth to Venus could be calculated. With that key distance established, so too could the dimensions of the rest of the solar system be calculated, including the precise distance between Earth and the Sun, known to scientists as the astronomical unit, the fundamental yardstick of solar astronomy, by which they could begin to calculate everything else. Sir Edmund had been so convinced that this was the golden key to unlock the mysteries of the solar system that he had left that key in a safe place for future generations, setting it all out in Latin, the language of science, in his paper for the Royal Society, and his words have been treasured since. Venus's transit over the Sun's disk, whose parallax being almost 4 times greater than that of the Sun, will cause very sensible differences between the times in which Venus shall seem to pass over the Sun's disk in different parts of our Earth. From these differences, duly observed, the Sun's parallax may be determined. Oh, and take a tip from the Grand Master in this field. I would have several observations made of the same phenomenon in different parts of the earth, both for further confirmation and lest a single observer should happen to be disappointed by the intervention of clouds from seeing what I know, not if those either of the present or following age shall ever see again, and upon which the certain and adequate solution of the noblest and otherwise most difficult problem depends. Therefore, again and again I recommend it to the curious strenuously to apply themselves to this observation. Brandishing Halley's golden key to the universe, the learned men of the Royal Society had approached the British government of 1760 to fund a voyage to St. Helena, to observe the eclipse for the improvement of astronomy and the honour of this nation. And it had been done, only for weather and other factors, including Halley's miscalculation of precise start times, to render most of the data unusable. So now the 1769 transit is their last chance before 1874. As early as 1766, the Royal Society's esteemed President Lord Morton recalled all the Society's astronomical instruments for the purpose of putting them in proper order. As the transit approaches, Lord Morton and the Royal Society make their formal approach to the King, writing a letter to His Majesty George III in February 1768, seeking support for the expedition. To the King's Most Excellent Majesty, the memorial of the President, Council and Fellows of the Royal Society of London, for improving natural knowledge, humbly showeth that the passage of the planet Venus over the disk of the Sun, on the 3rd of June in the year 1769, is a phenomenon that must, if the same be accurately observed in proper places, contribute greatly to the improvement of astronomy on which navigation so much depends. That a correct set of observations made in the southern latitudes would be of greater importance than many of those made in the northern. But it would be necessary that the observers who are to pass the line should take their departure from England early in the spring, because it might be some time before they could fix upon a proper place for making the observations within the limits required. Mercifully, the Royal Society is blessed that their sovereign, who is just shy of 30 at this time, is not shy of embracing science, for he is actually the first British monarch to have studied the subject, and it will be noted that its study and advancement were always objects of his deep interest and solicitude. On this project, the Royal Society will have the full support of the most important royal of all. In fact, His Majesty throws such support behind the whole enterprise that on the 24th of March, 1768, Lord Morton informs the Royal Society Council that the Treasury has already transferred £4,000 to their coffers. The King further instructs my First Lord of the Admiralty, Sir Edward Hawke, to select and make ready a suitable ship, and to aid the Royal Society insofar as it is deemed appropriate. In typical style, Hawke moves quickly, and ere a month has passed, on the 29th of March, the Navy Board informs the Admiralty, "We have purchased a cat-built bark, in burthen 368 tons, and of the age of 3 years and 9 months, for conveying such persons as shall be thought proper to the southward for making observations of the passage of the planet Venus over the disk of the Sun, and pray to be favoured with their lordships' directions for fitting her for the service accordingly, and that we may also receive their commands by what name she shall be registered on the list of the Navy." They receive a swift reply on the 7th of April. "Ship purchased, to be sheathed, filled, and fitted for a voyage to the southward, to be called the Endeavour." Now, as to where in the southern hemisphere the Royal Society should send their observation party, the Astronomer Royal, Dr. Neville Maskelyne, has already informed the King that it must be a place not exceeding 30 degrees of southern latitude, and between the 140th and 180th degrees of longitude, west from Your Majesty's Royal Observatory in Greenwich Park. That is, somewhere in the South Pacific, but not too far south.
They are not long in looking, however, as there is one man of enthusiasm and influence who, though not a Fellow of the Royal Society, ingratiates himself into society circles, and makes it known that he has spent more time in the Southern Hemisphere and the Southern Seas than most of the society men put together. It is Scottish geographer Alexander Dalrymple, who positively quivers with excitement and certitude of success when he thinks of the voyage that is to be launched. He now becomes ever louder in voicing many views, the first of which is that the most appropriate southern observation point in the South Pacific is most likely in the Marquesas or Tongan Islands. Personally, Dalrymple can see the climax of his career just up ahead. For beyond the leap forward in science and power of the Royal Navy that such a trip will engender, it might also see his self-proclaimed position as England's leading speculative geographer, the one who has long supported that centuries-old hypothesis about the existence of a great southern land, elevated to England's finest geographer of all time. No, not New Holland, for that enormous continent in the southern climes is already known, or at least the western end of it is, and substantially mapped courtesy of the Dutch, who had been all over it since the early 1600s, without settling on what appeared to them as barren wastelands. The great southern land is another continent, one posited since the days of Aristotle and expanded by Ptolemy, the great Greek mathematician, astronomer and geographer, who believed it stands to reason that there will be a great land mass in the south to balance the great land masses of Europe and the Americas in the north. Alexander Dalrymple agrees. For all of his adult life, the 31-year-old Dalrymple, all coiffed curls and a certain smarmy smugness, has been gathering historical hints about the existence of this place, every scrap of map, every oblique reference, and by putting them all together is convinced that it is no myth. Ptolemy's famous map had just been a mere starting point. However, the circumnavigation of the globe by Captain John Byron, known as Foul-Weather Jack, in the Dolphin from June 1764 to May 1766 had turned up nothing. So Dalrymple's hopes are now pinned to Captain Philip Carteret and Captain Samuel Wallis, currently on the high seas in the ships Swallow and Dolphin respectively, the latter on its second trip around the globe, charged with instructions to search for the elusive landmass. And yet Dalrymple sets little store in them finding it, for they lack the key thing, him. And though the Royal Society men know nothing of his private plans to captain the ship and discover the mythical continent, and finally get the recognition he deserves, they see no problem recommending him to the Admiralty as a suitable person to join the expedition as the observer. But Alexander Dalrymple won't stop there, particularly as he is sure that he is invaluable to the success of the endeavour, and trusts that the Royal Society men will understand that a man of his own eminence, as he writes to the Society's secretary, can have no thought of undertaking this voyage as a passenger going out to make the observations, or on any other footing than that of having the management of the ship intended for service. Indeed, indeed. Yes, things are a little complicated by the fact that he has never actually commanded a Royal Navy vessel before, and nor has he even been in the Royal Navy. It's hard to know whether he even knows the differences between a schooner and a collier. The Royal Society men tacitly support the idea, but the final decision is for the Admiralty. And yet, how can the First Lord of the Admiralty, Sir Edward Hawke, put this? No, as a matter of fact, he writes to the Royal Society's president, Lord Morton, that such a notion is entirely repugnant to the regulations of the Navy. The First Lord of the Admiralty goes even harder than that, declaring to his fellow admirals, sitting upright in prim uniforms around the dark, ornate wooden table in the Admiralty boardroom, "I would rather cut off my right hand than permit anyone but a king's officer to command one of the ships of His Majesty's Navy." Well, that's it then. Mr. Dalrymple has given the Royal Navy his conditions, and if the First Lord will not agree to them, then they will not be getting Mr. Dalrymple on their ship at all. They can get their own captain, their own scientist, and good luck in finding any as brilliant as Mr. Dalrymple. And that
is Alexander Dalrymple for you. Such tirades are very familiar to all who know him, and just as it is said of him that not the least of his talents is a talent for jumping to conclusions, today's conclusion that the Admiralty are ingrates and whoever is chosen ahead of him will be unworthy by comparison is very much of the variety known as foregone. Nevertheless, as it turns out, there is another member of the Royal Society who is more than interested in going on a voyage of such astronomical significance, one who does not insist on the captaincy being thrown in with it. That gay young blade of London town, Joseph Banks, the gentleman with the peaches and cream complexion, curiously ever and always fronted by his perennially sunburned nose from his ceaseless outdoor ramblings. The exceedingly wealthy young Banks has two great passions, and while one of them is indeed heavenly bodies, the ones in question are not zooming across the sky, but ideally zooming towards his bedchamber. Yes, what Banks truly cares about are women and botany, with astronomy not figuring in any way. But now is his opportunity to seize the moment and do precisely what he told those blockheads he would do: gallivant around the globe. Yes, the Newfoundland journey had been a memorable tour, but this journey to far corners of the map, and then beyond, would be an embarkation for the world itself. The grand tour. His mind reels to ponder the botanical realms that might open up to him on such a trip. And in smart contrast to that bloviating blowhard Mr. Dalrymple, Mr. Banks understands that command of this proposed voyage is neither here nor there. It is simply not important who formally gives the orders on the ship, for what truly counts is control. And one way to secure control? Buy it, of course. Committing his own money to the cause should be enough to not only secure him a position as naturalist on board, but also allow him to bring a suite of servants and scientists to help with the work that will come from all the botanizing, like Dr. Solander for one, and his greyhounds for 2 and 3. Hopefully it can even buy him some influence in deciding who the captain, effectively the driver of their ocean carriage, should be. Quietly, Banks is told that he has the support of Lord Morton and the Council of the Royal Society, as it is obvious that having a botanist of Banks' repute, together with his entourage of experts, can only add to the voyage's scientific clout, with the fact he will pay his own way a singularly significant bonus. It is not yet pursued formally, however. No matter, Joseph Banks, no more than 25 years old, but with that swagger and confidence that goes with wealth as extreme as it is well-connected, begins his private preparations for the journey regardless, ordering the making of special cases and boxes for the stowage of his specimens, plant and animal, and the ordering and purchasing of the equipment and material to meet the expected hazards and opportunities in a circumnavigation of not less than 2 years' duration. Back in the U-shaped Admiralty building, around the dark wood-ornate table, one name keeps coming up. A man backed by the highly regarded Captain Sir Hugh Palliser and the powerful Admiralty Secretary, Philip Stevens. He is a great mariner of greater promise, who is not yet a captain, but who has the desired qualifications to command the ship. Perhaps most importantly, this fellow has already demonstrated a proficiency in astronomical observations. You know the one, that fellow Master James Cook, the one who navigated the fleet up the St. Lawrence to Quebec, who has been commanding a vessel and charting the coastlines of Newfoundland and Labrador these past few years. He comes to the Admiralty each winter and has produced the most precise, exquisite charts we have ever seen. The same man who accurately observed the eclipse of the sun at Newfoundland a couple of years ago. Good God, the same man? Yes, Cook. He is surely perfect for the role. After all, you can't ask for better than the one who has maritime, cartographical, and astronomical skills, while also having come from nothing and nowhere with no influential familial connections, such as an imposing father-in-law or uncle, nor any sizable inheritance with which to throw his weight around. The route from total obscurity to preeminence in a highly respected field has been a supremely difficult one, spreading across the globe and through all manner of shoals and reefs, but somehow this extraordinary navigator might just have found it. In sum, when the Navy come up with their list of possible captains for this venture, it could be written on the back of a postage stamp, as it consists of just one name, James Cook. Yes, there is the complication that Cook has not yet passed his exams to be a lieutenant, let alone a captain, but if he is willing to take on the role, that can be surely resolved. 5th of May, 1768. Council Room of the Royal Society, Crane Court, London. O Captain, our Captain. It had been no less than Sir Isaac Newton himself, the then president and friend and colleague of Edmund Halley. The pair were viewed as the giants of their age, who had selected these grand premises for the Royal Society back in 1710, and also that great man who had begun the tradition we see on this very evening of 1768. As evening falls, the old porter emerges onto Fleet Street from the Society's grand Crane Court premises in a formal gown and bearing a staff displaying the arms of the Society in silver. On the end of the staff is a lit lantern, which the porter carefully places above the marble portico to indicate to the world that a meeting of the Royal Society is now in session. Gazing intently at the building before him as he steps out of his carriage, a tall, handsome fellow in a navy blue coat with gold trim, worn open with white breeches and stockings that end in shiny black boots, the dress uniform of a warrant officer of the Royal Navy, takes pause. It is quite the moment. The son of a farm labourer from the tiny village of Marton in Yorkshire, whose fate was in all likelihood to be a farm labourer from Marton, now summoned to meet the members of the mighty Royal Society, all lords, earls, barons, professors, eminent scientists, and public intellectuals, at their premises of rather stately splendour just off Fleet Street in London. Giving a rather dull shilling to the coachman, James Cook makes his way through the many carriages in the courtyards, with their personal coachmen waiting for the return of their masters, up the stairs, through the portico columns, and into the premises proper. In the foyer he hands his peaked hat to a porter with a gracious nod. He is neither greeted nor welcomed, as both would imply warmth of reception, but he is certainly ushered silently upstairs to a wooden bench by a thick wooden door, where he is to await his summons to meet with the Society's council. On the other side of the thick wooden door is a long, narrow, rather drab room, with an ornately decorated ceiling. At one end, the august council members of the Society sit on wooden benches, rising up in tiers on both sides of a long table, covered in a green cloth. At the far end of the table is another smaller table, where the President, James Douglas, the 14th Earl of Morton, sits with his back to the fireplace, facing the men gathered. On either side of him sit the Society's two secretaries, notes scattered before them. Lying by Lord Morton's right hand is a small wooden mallet, by which he can render the entire room silent with a single knock, while at the foot of his table lies a large silver-gilt mace, the symbol of his authority, placed so to show the council is in session, just as happens in the House of Commons. Captain John Campbell stands to speak. He happens to be that rare breed of Royal Navy man and Royal Society man that the admirals had sought for the South Seas voyage. Unfortunately, he is already commissioned as captain of a ship and is unable to leave that post. Not that he seems to mind too much. "James Cook," he announces to his fellows, "who is in attendance, will be appointed by the Admiralty to the command of the vessel destined for the observation in the southern latitudes. He is a proper person to be one of the observers in the observation of the transit of Venus." A murmur rumbles through the room, as the fellows speak among each other. Cook, his name is. That same fellow who observed the eclipse in Newfoundland? True, he's a fellow who has been to no grand school,
Sniff, is the offspring of no fine family. Sniff, sniff, what is that smell? But apparently, we are informed by Dr. Beavis and Captain Campbell, he is more than worth his salt, and it is for very good reason he has already been appointed by the Admiralty to the role, and now he will be a leading observer of the transit too. With a few muttered words from Lord Morton, one of the secretaries at the head table looks up and imperiously calls to an orderly to show Mr. Cook inside. The door opens with that agonized creak that is incumbent on all doors of such heavy constitution when their very nature is to remain closed, and, after a quick clip-clop of maritime boots on the wooden floor, a large figure is briefly silhouetted, taking up just about the entire doorway, before a naval officer of notably robust bearing strides into the room. The august fellows cast a gimlet eye over this newcomer, this fellow of such plebeian nomenclature and background, but it seems he bears no resemblance to the plebeian archetype. He is a remarkably tall, solid fellow with a strong-featured visage, unusual in one with no breeding. Cook, with remarkable poise under unnerving circumstances, gazes back evenly, taking it all in. Very well, then. We of the Royal Society, the instigators of this whole voyage, just want to be satisfied that he is capable, will follow our instructions regarding the observation, and won't rock the boat. Cook listens carefully as the august fellows outline the mission they have in mind for him, and speaks with even more discretion as he answers the questions put to him to the best of his abilities, which are clearly considerable. For in speaking about the science of navigation, about his tracking of the eclipse at Newfoundland, he is speaking the language of science, and the members of the Royal Society cannot help but be impressed. Cook not only walks as a distinguished naval officer, he talks the language of the accomplished scientist. The faces of Lord Morton, Captain Campbell, and Astronomer Royal Neville Maskelyne say it all. This wondrous James Cook is that rarest of things, a man who is truly both a sailor and a scientist, and is just the man to command the voyage. And the most important thing for now is Cook's response when questioned about his own views. Yes, he wishes to go on this venture. Yes, he is sure he is capable of making the calculations concerning the transit of Venus. Yes, a Royal Society gift of £110, in addition to his naval pay of £20 per annum, is quite acceptable. And with nary another word needing to be spoken, Master James Cook turns on his shiny black-booted heel and strides to the back of the room, where he stands back to the wall. Next. For with the Cook matter taken care of, the next man ushered into the grand room is another nervous Yorkshireman, Mr. Charles Green, former assistant to the Astronomer Royal, Sir Neville Maskelyne, the former nearly as experienced as the latter in spending his days keeping correct time at Greenwich and gazing at the heavens. Green is a meticulous kind of fellow, but he is used to observing, not being observed and gazed at by the great, the good, and the glaring, who are now all around him. Nervously he stands, blinking back at them, as formalities are read through, inviting him to be the other official observer of the transit of Venus on the coming expedition. Finally, he is invited to speak, regarding whether he agrees to the sum of £120 that the Royal Society has seen fit to equip him and this Captain Cook with to observe the transit. Do you agree to allowance aforesaid? Yes, he does. With a further gratuity to yourself of 200 guineas? 200 guineas? Don't say yes now, wait till the man in the wig stops speaking. For the voyage. And if the voyage should exceed 2 years, then at the rate of 100 guineas per annum? Yes, Mr. Green agrees to that as well. After all, he is not really being asked, and is rather more being told. One does not argue the toss with the Royal Society. It is an extraordinary privilege to be in their presence, let alone be given a mission by them. Very well then, Mr. Green. Take your place by your fellow Yorkshireman, the one in navy uniform, up the back on the left. Master James Cook keeps his own counsel,
and attention now turns to the equipment itself. And so Master Cook is approved to be kitted out by the Royal Society, with his freshly secured astronomical instruments, telescopes, a sextant, a journeyman clock, and more. Oh, and we shall also need such specialized instruments as a dipping needle, to measure the angle between the horizon and Earth's magnetic field, and an astronomical quadrant, to measure the altitudes of celestial bodies, providing crucial data to calculate geographical position. Once the meeting room is emptied, the secretary picks up the large silver-gilt mace from the floor and places it upon the table. The Royal Society Council is no longer in session. Early morning, 20th of May, 1768. Aphrodite's Isle. Weary Captain Wallace sits in the great cabin of the Dolphin, dictating his final log entry to his clerk. The ship anchored safely in the Downs, it being just 637 days since her weighing anchor in Plymouth Sound. A short time later, he climbs down the rope ladder into a waiting Navy tender, which drops him at the dock, and he is soon on his way to London and the Admiralty with the news of an island paradise he has discovered in the South Pacific, an island paradise by the native name of Tahiti, now renamed King George III's Island. Sure enough, just 3 weeks after meeting with the Royal Society, on the 25th of May, James Cook receives a letter from the Admiralty addressed to Elizabeth, come quickly, Lieutenant James Cook. He opens his first commission with a tremulous left hand, knowing it will be life-changing. And indeed, we have appointed you First Lieutenant of His Majesty's bark the Endeavour, now at Deptford, and intend that you shall command her during her present intended voyage. You are hereby required and directed to use the utmost dispatch in getting her ready for the sea accordingly. Given, etc., 25th of May, 1768. So it is done. James Cook has his commission as a lieutenant and his preliminary instructions. Yes, there will be surprise in some quarters that a newly promoted lieutenant will be in charge of such an expedition when the 2 previous English expeditions to the Pacific had been conducted by Commodore Byron and Captain Wallace. But the Royal Navy is firm. Cook has precisely the credentials required, if not the expected rank, and that is all that counts. 2 days later, at dawn, Lieutenant James Cook leaves his Mile End home, crosses the Thames in a ferry, and heads by carriage down to Deptford, where his very own ship awaits. As to what kind of bark the Endeavour is, Captain James Cook, for he will be so addressed by his men as a matter of nautical courtesy, could not be more delighted, and there is very good reason that she feels like home the minute he sets foot upon her pine deck. For yes, the Endeavour is none other than one of the old coal tubs he learnt to sail on and has come to adore, a Whitby cat. Built and launched on the high seas just under 4 years earlier, it is capacious enough to hold their stores and sturdy, reliable, and clearly capable of getting them to the other side of the world and back. With its flat bottom and snub nose, the Endeavour is perfect for getting in and out of all the new shallow coves, bays, and estuaries they will surely discover. Cook, meticulous as he is, has studied the Navy Yard's report on the Endeavour and knows it backwards. Stern back, single bottom, full built, is a promising ship for sailing of this kind, and fit to stow provisions and store as many as may be put on board her. He studies these statistics eagerly. 97 feet overall, 29 foot 3 inches beam, height between decks, an important consideration for a man of Cook's build, varying from 7 foot 11 inches to 7 foot 6 inches, with ample space for stores and provisions.
This ends CD 3.